today, by the way. More fresh, more relaxed.
Well, that's good to hear.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you again, Colonel. You did warn last time we spoke that kinetic strike seems almost inevitable, and we are getting reports now that Trump is considering it because the negotiations don't seem to be progressing. Iran seems to be, they're not budging. They want to control the Strait of Hormuz. They want to be able to charge a fee. They want to now delay the discussions on the nuclear program, and everything else is off the table. The support for their allies, the proxies or allies, is non-negotiable by the looks of it. Ballistic missile program is obviously non-negotiable. So we're in a position now where Trump is not even able to get what he was allegedly able to get in the Omani Geneva discussions, negotiations. So now I'm starting to see that, kind of what he's saying is almost inevitable unless the economic blockade works.
Well, I think that's probably true. We can't be 100% certain at this point. We're not sitting in the Oval Office listening to the conversation. But I would back up for a minute and try to offer an analogy of sorts that might explain where we're headed next. A lot of people don't understand this, but in 1914, when war broke out and the Russians decided to mobilize against Austria in support of Serbia, there was no unanimity in the British cabinet about going to war. In fact, most of the cabinet initially discussed the possibility of going to war with Germany and said, well, we've had lots of wars with the French. We've never had any wars with the Germans. Our interests don't necessarily collide, and therefore we probably don't want to become involved in this. But the outcome was, no, they violated Belgian neutrality. We signed this obscure act over 100 years ago. We've got to go back in and support the French. Well, Winston Churchill was one of the principal warmongers, surprise, surprise. And he convinced the cabinet that the war would be decided in an afternoon in the North Sea by the Royal Navy. There would be a giant fleet action between the Atlantic fleet of the Royal Navy and the German fleet. The Germans would obviously lose, and losing that opening battle at sea, then there would be a reluctance to continue and the war would not break out on land. Now, a lot of people thought, my goodness, how could you ever reach such a conclusion? What difference would it make to the Germans whether or not they had a fleet fighting the British in the North Sea? And what made anybody think that the Royal Navy's victory in the North Sea would have much impact on Germany that had the largest, most powerful ground force in Europe? But viewed through the lens of the British, naval power was everything. That was their true strength, and they saw the world as being shaped by their naval power. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is that ultimately they did send a force to France. It was only about 150,000 men. It was a good force, but it was woefully inadequate for what was required. Most of it was destroyed as it retreated 230 miles from Belgium back into France. And at that point, there were many people in Great Britain that said, whoops, we made a mistake. This is not going to work. We need to cut our losses and get out. In fact, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, General French, said, let's head for the ports. Get out of here. We have no chance of success against the Germans. They're dominating us. But the British government said, no, we can't leave. There's too much at stake. There's national honor. There's our reputation, our position as the leading power. We cannot possibly disengage. And so they stayed. They paid a terrible price for it. They lost over 800,000 killed. Their economy was severely damaged. And ultimately, the win was Pyrrhic. Britain arguably never completely recovered from the First World War. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because if you look at us, and you had been in the Oval Office listening to General Kane and others in the Oval Office talk to President Trump, I think they would have made similar observations. We have the greatest Air Force in the world. You combine the Air Force with the Naval Air Force, there's no one in the world that can stand against us. They have no chance. This is not a strong country. Their economy is a fraction of ours. And ultimately, they spend perhaps 1% of what we do on defense. So, clearly we are the nation with enormous strategic advantage. Well, that hasn't turned out to be the case because naval power is not going to decide the outcome of this war. Neither is air power. In fact, even ground power, if we put something in there, and we're much like the British, we have a very small army, it's not going to make a dent. how could this possibly have happened? And I think it's because, first and foremost, we see things through our own vision. In other words, we see the world through a lens that satisfies us, but it may not be realistic for the rest of the world. Donald Trump is in a terrible position because in the midst of all of this, he's boasted constantly. We're the best. We're the finest in the world. And oh, by the way, this is the military I rebuilt during my last term, which of course is absurd. It takes 10 years to build an army. It takes at least that long, probably longer to build an air force. It takes 20 or 30 years to field a navy. He didn't build anything that was new when he was in office, far from it. He's caught up in all of this sort of bloviation, bombast, and nonsense. What is he going to do? And I think you're hearing now conversations that are similar to what happened when they finally declared war on Germany and Great Britain. Well, we can't back out. We can't walk away. We can't admit that we've made a mistake. That's impossible. Well, the British reinforced stupidity. They wasted 4 or 5 years and enormous quantities of manpower and resources in a war they didn't have to fight. That's our position right now. Only I would argue our position is weaker than Britain's position was in 1914. And why is it that way? Because what we're doing is seen by the rest of the world as preventing them from gaining access to the critical elements, petroleum, helium, phosphorus, phosphates. Just go down the list of all of the things that come out of the Persian Gulf that go to the global south and go to Europe that are vital and essential. And what are we watching happen inside the United States, as well as the, I would argue, the Europe? Gas prices in the United States have moved up by 42%. This is the largest spike in gas prices, certainly since 2022, and it's well on its way to being the biggest spike we've seen in at least 30 years. Our farm sector is now strained under a diesel and fertilizer cost shock. Farm bankruptcies are up by 46%. 1.9 million farms in the United States. That's the lowest number we've ever had in recorded history. Diesel prices are up 54.4% from a year ago. 70% of farmers in the United States say they can't even afford to buy fertilizer. Now, the point is, can we do this? And the answer is not very long. Now, we haven't even talked about the rest of the world that is blaming us for their misfortunes. And with a considerable justification, I would say, we set up this separate blockade. Now, why did we go to a blockade? Because we didn't know what else to do. Yeah. And I think President Trump decided not to decide. He says, I need time to think. I've got to mull this over. I've got to find a way through this. So we'll blockade the place. Well, for an island like Cuba, it took 180 vessels. And this blockade that we ran on Cuba ran all the way out into the North Atlantic. We don't have 180 vessels to blockade Iran, and Iran is not an island. Iran has avenues that it can import and export goods, services, and most important, oil. So the point is, the blockade's a temporary fix. Now there are being discussions of, well, let's make it global. Well, if you want to end up at war with China and watch the Japanese and the Koreans and the Vietnamese and everybody else cheer on the Chinese, that's where you're headed, because
global. Sorry, Colonel, what do you mean by global? As in seize the Iranian ships outside the Persian Gulf?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's what Hegseth has said they want to do.
They seized one in Malacca, I think, in the Malacca Straits.
Exactly. The Strait of Malacca is vital strategic territory for China. The Chinese watch the South China Sea very carefully. Why? Why would the Chinese be so concerned? Well, they have long experience. Before we became troublesome, they had to deal with the Royal Navy, which controlled the South China Sea and ultimately controlled their ports, forced them to accept millions of tons of opium, creating addicts all over the country. These were the opium wars run by the Royal Navy. When they finally got the Royal Navy out of the way, what happened? They had to deal with the Imperial Japanese Navy. And the Imperial Japanese Navy made it possible for 1 million Japanese troops to march into China and kill millions of Chinese. All of this, what is tied up with Taiwan, it's tied up with the South China Sea. The Chinese are only going to sit quietly for so long until they finally say, the Americans are nuts. They're dangerous. We can't allow this to go on. They have a fleet. They have the capability. How long do they wait before they steam down into the South China Sea and steam right through the Strait of Malacca? Because after all, our little global blockade, if we implement it, is just going to further constrain everybody else's access to the Persian Gulf, because we're checking not only everything that comes out, but we're probably not going to let anything go in. This entire thing is a catastrophe. And Donald Trump has to make a decision. What are the three calls that he can make? He can say, you know, this is stupid. And on humanitarian grounds, I'm ending our conflict with Iran. We're going to have to find other ways to resolve our differences. That's number one. Number two, well, I'm going to keep this blockade up as long as I need to until the Iranians are all starving to death and finally, you know, cry uncle, as he mentioned the other day. Well, that's not going to happen. The Iranians are definitely going to survive this. They're living in a giant fortress surrounded by mountains. They have inexhaustible quantities of missiles and unmanned systems. They can strike anything that comes within 500 miles of their borders or more. They're not going anywhere. So that brings you back to what you asked to begin with. Why not resume the kinetic strikes? Why not begin again the air and missile war? And remember, you've got thousands of ground troops that, at least in theory, could be employed in the Persian Gulf in some fashion. So what is he going to do? And again, you've got to go back to what's the nature of Trump. And the nature of Trump is Roy Cohn. And what did Roy Cohn teach him? Number one, deny everything. Number two, attack, attack, attack. Number three, twist everything into a victory. But Donald Trump is not a stupid man. He can't simply walk away from this and say, well, we destroyed everything. We won. I mean, you can only tell everybody so often that, oh, we defeated their Navy. We defeated their Army, Air Force, which are both inconsequential to the Iranians. And nobody buys it. So that means he faces national humiliation. So I think the only way for him to get out of this is to recognize that we are suffering more at home as a result of this than is good for him politically and good for the American people. And then secondly, he's got to realize that the entire world is gradually aligning with Iran against us. So what's he do? He should get out. He should say, on humanitarian grounds, I owe it to the rest of the world. This is a global problem. We're not going to solve it with military power. But I don't see him doing that. So I think he'll strike.
There's the statement by Trump. The blockade is genius. The blockade is 100% foolproof, which shows how good our Navy is. Militarily, we've wiped them out. They have no military left. The Navy's at the bottom of the sea. The Air Force is never going to fly again. Now, that's all political talk that's expected from Trump. Now, this is the statement that I was speaking to Professor Fa'ad Izadi earlier today, and it seems Iranians took offense to it. His rhetoric is doing the U.S. a disservice, because the Iranians are not the people that, they're not the type of people that want to be humiliated. And they've said that to him, according to the Wall Street Journal. They said, your rhetoric is making it harder for us to negotiate with the decision makers so they concede anything whatsoever. He doesn't seem to have changed his rhetoric. Here he says, now they have to cry uncle. That's all they have to do. Just say, we give up, but their economy is in real trouble. It's a dead economy. So we are in a position where, you know, option two is an economic blockade to see who blinks first. How long do you think the Iranians could sustain this?
I think they could sustain it for months. I don't know how many months, but it's certainly many, many months. And they've got the Russians and the Chinese who are going to help them and assist them in any way they can. They're going to continue to trade with everybody who will trade with them. And that's most of the world. I think the problem is far greater on our side. This is not an existential war for us. This is a war we never needed to fight. We're involved in this war because of Israel, because of Mr. Netanyahu essentially said, no, we can win this in a few days, and this will remove an existential threat to Israel. Well, that hasn't happened. The existential threat to Israel is now, in my judgment, even greater than it was before the war began.
Colonel, how can Trump accept the Iranian demands? I understand they've got the upper hand. I think Trump has shown not only he wants to walk away, but he's happy to give up a lot of the initial requirement, the initial requests he had at the beginning of the war. But we're in a position now, and I've said this to others as well, is that the Iranians are, they're asking for things that would be impossible for Trump to accept. Accepting Iran to control the Strait of Hormuz with no time limit whatsoever just diminishes completely destroys the U.S. image of having the world's most powerful navy, of the protector of the seas and international trade, and the U.S. being the most powerful military in the world. Changes the global world order where other countries could do the same in their own straits. I think it just diminishes the U.S. to such a level where it's no longer a political loss for Trump, but it will have catastrophic consequences for the states. That's for the Strait of Hormuz. And to walk away without actually having any concessions on the nuclear program is also a humiliating loss for Trump. He cannot even twist, as Roy Cohn says, he can't twist this into a win. So shouldn't the Iranians also concede something? I'm not saying concede everything. Request the lifting of sanctions, the unfreezing of assets. That's their right. You can say they've been under economic warfare for decades. That's fine. And they give up concessions on the nuclear program. But the Strait of Hormuz control with no time limit seems to be a pretty extreme demand.
Well, the Ottoman Turks lost the First World War to Great Britain, but the British eagerly signed up for the Montreux Convention, which gave Turkey control of the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. And the Turks have handled that very, very well. So I don't see conceding something that we cannot reverse as necessarily catastrophic for us. We didn't go into the war to prevent Iran from controlling the strait. Apparently, nobody bothered to consider the possibility that Iran could ultimately do that. But then again, I don't think we understood the extent to which this intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance complex and space-based persistent surveillance linked to all sorts of missile systems and unmanned systems on the ground could be as effective as it's turned out to be. I don't think we appreciated that. We should have. We saw evidence for this in eastern Ukraine, but we didn't really take it seriously. Once again, the same problem the British had is the problem that we have. We tend to take experience against weak opponents and translate that into great power. It was one thing for the British Army to take on tribesmen in Waziristan, or to slaughter Sudanese tribesmen with machine guns in 1899. But taking on the Imperial German Army, that was an entirely different matter. And they were pretty desperate, and they fought for 3 years along with the French. And had we not entered the war and bailed them out, they would have ended up having to concede defeat. They would have had to sit down and negotiate terms with the Germans, which they didn't want to do. So we rescued them. There's nobody out there to rescue us. So I think one of two things has to happen. If President Trump cannot find it in his heart to come to terms with the reality that this is something he can't win, if he's not willing to make any concessions and he wants to drag this out month after month after month, which is a distinct possibility that we should not exclude, even if he begins to launch more strikes, those strikes are not going to produce the effect that he wants. So that means that even after he launches more strikes, he's still stuck with the same essential problem. So if he doesn't come to terms with that, what do? Mario, you remove the president.
You think that could happen?
Yes, absolutely. Go back to, I'm sure everybody else has said this to you. The American people were never consulted on this. How could this war have come about without any real consultation with the American people? The Americans weren't asked to vote for it. No one went to the American people and made the case for it. The president never gave a speech that said, we are going to fight Iran. We're going to war with Iran. And we're going to war because the Israelis don't want them to have nuclear weapons, and we agree with that. And because the Israelis don't want them to have their ballistic missile arsenal, and we agree with that. And the Israelis don't want Iran to cooperate with anyone in the region against them, and we agree with that. He never built the case. And if he had tried to do that, most Americans would have said, what? Why are we going to war again? Because this is what Israel wants? He's never articulated the criticality of fighting to the American people. So what do you do? Well, he didn't have to go to Congress because Congress is on the hook for the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby controls the House. It controls the Senate. It also obviously controls Donald Trump and the White House. And people are saying, oh, that's not true. You don't control Donald Trump. Well, I've got news for you. If he didn't control Donald Trump, he wouldn't have gone to war. And for the people that argue, well, this is really about China. And the idea is you're going to hurt China by choking off the Persian Gulf. Well, that's a pretty dumb idea, because if you actually try to do that, you're going to end up in a war with China. And China is not a weak opponent. And whatever victories you had over Iraqis or Afghans or Libyans or anybody else are absolutely meaningless. This is a peer power. This is a mega power on every conceivable level, another continental power that cannot be conquered. So no, I don't think the idea was to go to war in order to harm China. People, though, in Washington are dumb enough to say, well, this is kind of an unanticipated benefit. We're harming China, really. So that means that the rare earths the Chinese control, which are so vital to our defense industries and so many other things in private and in public life, doesn't have an impact because the Chinese can essentially cut us off. And what do we do then when we want to reproduce missiles, whether it's Patriot or strike missiles or aircraft or anything else? So I think it's a very dumb idea at this point to think that somehow or another this is going to harm China. China is even more resilient than Iran.
Wouldn't it give the US leverage over China, though? If obviously that ship has sailed now, the days of talking about US control of the Strait of Hormuz, that's no longer on the table. Now it's just getting out of the war without having a humiliating defeat. That's what we're trying to achieve. And the Iranis are not even letting Trump achieve that. Do you think there's elements within the IRGC that not only don't want to concede and they're emboldened after this war, but they actually want to drag the US back into the war? There's been reports about it, but it's impossible to find out what's happening in Iran. But is it possible that they want to drag the US into this war to further deplete their munitions, further cause harm, to ensure long-term deterrence that no president does this again? Is that possible that Iran is at that place, or at least some elements of the IRGC?
Well, I'm sure there may be some people like that, but I don't think that characterizes the national purpose. I think Iran would very much like to see an end to this war, but Iran wants certain things, one of which is our complete evacuation of the region. I mean, they're tired of being surrounded by US bases from which we can launch.
Mustafa said this today in the statement. Not sure if you saw it, but he talked about American bases no longer being in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't blame him at all, but I would go a step further. Those bases are no longer useful. Why are they not useful? Because they can be easily attacked and destroyed with what? Precision guided weapons guided from space, with the benefit of persistent surveillance. The entire U.S. military strategy, the entire U.S. military force structure is lost somewhere in 1944 and 45. I listened to Marines and Army and Navy officers who were telling me, we've got to take control of the first and second island chains. And you try to tell them, if you go sit on a small island, I'm sure the enemy would be delighted. All he has to do is devastate the island. How long do you think Guam would last in a war with the Chinese? 15 minutes? 30 minutes? I mean, this is crazy. Unless you have an island that you can go into the size of Borneo, whatever you try to occupy and utilize is not going to last. In other words, the whole, what I would call 19th century, mid 20th century strategic mindset is irrelevant. And what Iran has learned to do, many, many other middleweight powers are going to be able to replicate. That's the other lesson.
Yeah. That is a big problem long term. Is that a lot of other countries will see this as a precedent in the way they deal with the US, which is the complete opposite of what we saw in Venezuela. We saw one capitulate to an extent, and then we saw Iran do the complete opposite, and it backfired on the US. There's a report that came in today. Not sure if you saw it. CENTCOM just asked to deploy the Army's Dark Eagle hypersonic missile to the Middle East for possible use against Iran. The Dark Eagle is the US Army's first deployed hypersonic missile, a hypersonic weapon. Officially designated the long-range hypersonic weapon, it carries a glide body that travels the speed above Mach 5, with a range exceeding 1,725 miles. It's designed to strike high-value, time-sensitive targets that current weapons can't reach in time or can't penetrate, which is like hardened underground facilities, deeply buried command bunkers. Do you know anything about that hypersonic missile that they're referring to?
Well, I know what you said. I am uncertain about the claims that are made. We don't know with certainty what it will or won't do in terms of explosive power. So we'll have to wait and see when it's employed, whether or not it performs to expectation. A lot of weapons that were employed at the beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian war did not perform to expectation, both Western and Russian. Until you start to use these things, you can't be 100% certain. But it makes sense that President Trump is trying to convince himself that one of these weapons is going to rescue the operation. You know, this is what happened in the last year of the Second World War with Hitler. He reached for anything that promised victory, and he looked at a number of silver bullet weapon systems. Now, those silver bullet weapon systems could have been enormously powerful if he had started on that path back in 1940, but he was 4 years too late, and frankly, those weapons made no difference to the outcome of the war. I would argue right now that we're in a similar position. So we bring in these hypersonic missiles. That's great. How many hypersonic missiles are we going to fire? How many can we produce in what short period of time? How much intensity can we sustain with those weapons? I mean, these are all the critical questions. I don't know, but my suspicion is you're not going to be able to do much with that particular weapon system that is going to change the attitude and mindset of the Iranian government. And that's for the reasons that you already brought up. What possible sane person would sit down and negotiate terms with this current president and his government and buy it? Can you believe anything we say? Where's the evidence that we will carry through on our promises? There just is none. Probably one of the most important treaties we ever signed was the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty, the INF Treaty. And we casually dismissed it out of hand. And that was a very, very important development because it relieved us and the Soviets at the time of the requirement to build those things. Because if you built enough of them, they had a chance inside Europe, which incidentally is much smaller than what you're dealing with right now in Iran, to have a war-winning capability. So ultimately, both sides said, fine, we'll eliminate the category. We threw it out. We don't know what's going on right now. We've discarded all of the peace, not peacekeeping, but arms control regimes that we formerly relied on. So we have no surveillance. We don't know with absolute certainty what our potential opponents have and they don't necessarily know what we have. So I guess my point is, why would the Iranians negotiate with us at all? For them, the best case is we give up and leave.
So the Iran's Navy commander said soon will reveal something they deeply fear right on their doorstep. You've got another political leader, senior Iranian official, Mohansen Rezai, said, we will not tolerate a naval blockade. And if the blockade continues, Iran will respond. At the same time, Axios reports that Brad Cooper, the CENTCOM commander, will brief Trump next Thursday, or that's today, the reports today. So he'll brief him in a week on military strike options against Iran. Options include short and powerful strikes on Iranian infrastructure, ground operations to seize part of Hormuz, and a special forces mission to take Iran's uranium directly. So it's like all the things we've discussed, they're all being discussed. All the options are on the table, apparently, according to Axios, and there was a similar report by another outlet a few days ago. And Iran has made it very clear that if they're back into war, there's going to be gloves off for them. They're going to target the energy infrastructure in the Gulf, close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and cut my internet off, Colonel. They're going to cut off the undersea cables. They're going to damage them for the Gulf countries. What is a full-blown war? First, not a full-blown war. If Trump takes any of these recommendations from Brad Cooper, how will Iran respond, and what would a war look like? And how would it? And could we get into an escalation trap where one thing leads to another, and we're in another quagmire?
Well, the real question is, who has escalation dominance? Do we or the Iranians? And I would argue that the Iranians are now in a position to dictate the escalation. I also think that President Putin's call yesterday to President Trump was focused on this very issue. Now, I don't know what passed in that phone call, and there's no reason why I should. But I rather suspect that President Putin may have told President Trump something along the lines of what you just said. You know, this is an existential war for Iran. We attack them again, or you attack them again, and they will respond with everything they have. They have no incentive to moderate their response. They have no incentive to believe anything you say. So Putin's recommendation was, don't go back to war. Find a different way out of this. And I'm sure that President Putin offered to support whatever negotiations were held. And ultimately, if the Iranians were going to agree to anything that we put on the table, I imagine they'd want Chinese and Russian guarantees that they will support Iran in the event that these agreements are violated. So I think the Iranians are now in charge. They have the strategic initiative. They can dictate the escalation. We are limited. We're still 6,000, 7,000 miles from home. Everything requires transport over a great distance to reach the battle space. And we're wearing out a lot of equipment. We're wearing out a lot of people. I was glad to see the Gerald Ford is headed home, because those poor bastards need a break. They've been through a lot. People don't know what it's like to go to sea for long periods of time. And all the equipment needs maintenance. So right now we're down to 2 carrier battle groups plus whatever the Air Force can mobilize. And now they're looking at these hypersonic missiles that, as far as I know, may have been tested, but certainly never tested under combat conditions. It's a measure of desperation, Mario, on the part of President Trump. What can I find? What can I get? What can I use that will make these people submit to me? And my point is, Mr. President, there's nothing you can do that will compel the Iranians to submit to Israeli demands, which is really why we're fighting the war. And there's no incentive for Russia or China or India or Japan or Korea or Vietnam or anybody else to step in and stop this. There are a lot of people right now looking at what's happening to us, and they look at this as comeuppance for our extreme arrogance and mistreatment of so many people in the world over many, many years. Americans don't understand this. In the United States, anybody who is in a U.S. military uniform wears a permanent white hat. He's a good guy. Everybody he fights is a bad guy. But the rest of the world doesn't see it that way. And I think right now, there are a lot of people who would like to see us be embarrassed. So I think the smart move for President Trump is to go back to what I said. This is a terrible crisis. It's harming everyone. It's time to open the Persian Gulf. I am directing a suspension of all military operations against Iran, and I am disengaging our forces from the region. We will find a different way forward, and we will welcome mediation from powers that are willing to do so to resolve our differences with Iran. But again, there's a problem, Mario. Yeah. There's a third party. It's Israel. Israel has always wanted the destruction of Iran. That's what this war is about as far as they're concerned.
I think they bit off more than they can chew. You might disagree. I just don't think they can. I have a feeling Trump is really pissed off after this war and the intelligence he was given. I wouldn't be surprised if it really lashes out on them. I think he made a few comments on that. And today he said about, he's called it Netanyahu yesterday. He said, I told him he has to do it more surgically about Lebanon, not knock down buildings. It is too terrible. It makes Israel look bad. That's not too aggressive of a thing. I think he said something more aggressive against Israel. He's like, I have ordered, or the US has ordered Israel to halt attacking Lebanon, something along those lines. So I have a feeling, at least now this is just rhetoric, and it's happened before. Actions need to follow, but the ceasefire is holding in Lebanon to an extent very different to before. Isn't there a possibility that we may them that would have been the straw that broke the camel's back, and Trump may kick off what's inevitable anyway, and that's a massive shift in the U.S. against Israeli foreign policy or Israeli influence over U.S. foreign policy?
Well, if there's enough rain and sunshine, then I suppose the grass that surrounds my home will flourish. You're asking a question I can't answer, and you're asking it in a hopeful way. I don't see any hope. if you're an Israeli right now and you support Mr. Netanyahu, this is your chance, because right now he has complete control of the United States Armed Forces. He's the one who's really in charge. If people hadn't figured that out when Mr. Vance walked out of the meeting, got on the phone and called Netanyahu, then I don't know what to tell people. So until that fundamentally changes, no, I don't think we're going to see anything magical from this relationship that's any good.
I'm hoping he called Netanyahu not to get his opinion on the peace deal, but to tell him that Lebanon will be included. That, at least that's me hoping that's the case.
Listen, hope springs eternal.
The last question for you, Colonel, is China. How involved has China been in this war? There was the cargo ship that was seized by the US that apparently had a gift, according to Trump, from China, something that Trump said is classified. He can't talk about what's in that cargo ship. There's been reports that China's not delivered not only manpads to Iran, but also the air defense systems, the HQ-9s. How involved do you think China has been? They've got their intelligence ship as well near the Persian Gulf throughout the entire war. There's been reports they've offered intelligence to Iran. How involved have they been? But more importantly, if the war continues, how involved will they be?
I think the Chinese are as involved as they can be, short of going to war against the United States. And I think that's where it ends. Nobody, contrary to what people in Washington think, there's nobody in Beijing and nobody in Moscow that wants to go to war with the United States. They don't. Now, the problem is in the United States, people puff up their chests and say, well, it's because we're the best, we're the biggest, we're the baddest. No, it's because war is a very stupid idea. War is too destructive. It damages commercial activity. It destroys living standards. Nobody wants anything to do with it. We're the ones that talk about war. When you go to conferences in Asia, it's always the United States is trying to argue that everyone should join them in some sort of new trilateral relationship to attack China. Very recently, we had the Army 4-star in Korea, a place where the people would very much like the U.S. military to get out and go home. We've been there for over 70 years. They're sick of it. They think we should leave. They do not feel threatened by China, and they know that North Korea is not going to attack them. But he made a comment publicly and said it's time for us to link Japan, Korea, and the Philippines together to build what he called a kill web aimed at China. What he's really talking about is what you're seeing in Iran, a system of ISR strike, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets of all types and kinds, from seabed to space, linked to all kinds of standoff attack weaponry, long range, medium range, short range, and aiming all of it at China. You know, we have a battery of theater ballistic missiles sitting on the northern island of Luzon in the Philippines aimed at China. I mean, if you're Chinese and you listen to this nonsense, you see where we are, what we're doing, you're convinced that you have to be on your guard. You don't want a war, but you're looking at the people in charge in Washington and saying, these people want a war. So Iran, which is a major supplier of petroleum products to us, is someone we're going to help and support. It's also vital to the Belt and Road Initiative. And the whole Belt and Road Initiative sprang up not because somebody in China woke up and said, let's rebuild the Silk Road that used to operate effectively when it was under the Mongolian Empire. No, they said, we have to have an alternative to sea-based trade because there's this organization in the Pacific. It's called the U.S. Navy. We don't know when they'll try to blockade us. We don't know when they'll try to destroy our ports and prevent us from doing business. So we need to have a network of roads and railroads all over Central Asia, reaching all the way down into Iran, eventually across, I would suspect, the Suez and into Africa, as well as all the way to Rochefort in France on the West Coast. These things are viewed as strategic necessities, as vital to Chinese national security. So yes, the Chinese are going to do everything they can to help and assist the Iranians survive this experience. By the way, the Russians are doing a great deal as well, but the Russians are still tied down in eastern Ukraine because President Putin has hoped against hope for years that he could negotiate an end to the war. I think it's finally beginning to sink in that no, No one is going to sit down and negotiate with him. Now, that may change if we get rid of Merz in Berlin, we get rid of Starmer in London, get rid of Macron in France. But until that happens, he's going to have to win the war once and for all. And I think that's where the Russians are headed. So he's not going to get Iran's not going to get quite as much from Russia as it's going to get from China. But everybody is viewing us through the same lens. The lens that we're viewing the rest of the world is distorted. It's unrealistic. It doesn't fit. We're out of step with reality on this planet. We don't want to live in a world where we are not the hegemonic power. And that's all this is ultimately about. And in Trump's mind, if he can't crush Iran and compel them to submit, well, then we're in a lot of trouble. The possibility that we don't have to do that this entire war could have been avoided, that the Israelis are going to have to learn to live as a normal state inside the Middle East, those things don't occur to him, and that's the problem. So it's back to your initial question. Where do we go next? I find it very hard to believe that he will not, quote unquote, in his mind, unleash hell in a last-ditch attempt to try and bring Iran to heel. It's not going to work. And I would not exclude the possibility that the Iranians demonstrate some capabilities that we have not seen yet. I think that'll happen.
Great. So I should leave. I should pack up my suitcase tonight and leave the UAE again, Colonel, based on what you said.
I think it's worth serious consideration.
That's a shame to hear. Well, Colonel, I appreciate you making the time as always. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll speak again, hopefully under better circumstances.
I'm sorry to be so depressing.
Not at all, Colonel. Thank you so much, sir.
With a series of jokes in the future.
We'll plan them ahead. Thank you, Colonel.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sir. Scott, hopefully here we are again, man. Me and Dave Smith were just talking about you about an hour and a half ago, talking about the 10-point plan. And here we are. Dave was like, we met, maybe they couldn't get Syria, maybe they couldn't get Iran, that they managed to get Syria, and now they got Iran. We haven't spoken in a while. We spoke in the midst of the war. Where do you stand on this? I'm actually really interested to hear whether you think the war is over, or whether you think it's just a step in a long process that is just getting started.
Well, actually, I have to say I regret. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's good to be with you again. I regret very much that I didn't tune in earlier. I would have liked to hear more of what Col.Macgregor had to say. He's a great guy.
It wasn't good.
Sharp guy on this stuff. Yeah. Now, look, he likes predicting things a lot more than me. I'm afraid to most of the time. I think the way I look at it, Mario, is that Donald Trump could just quit right now, call it whatever he wants, which he's happy to do if it strikes him as what he feels like doing on any given day. We saw, you mentioned the 10-point plan. I'm not sure which one you were referring to, but the one on my mind is where
the 10-point plan. I got lost with the negotiations that are ongoing right now.
The 7 countries
exactly. What is it called? The break. Yeah. What is it called?
Clean break. Well,
clean break. There you go.
Different. They're close. They're very closely related, these memos. Yeah. Anyways, we can talk about that. But on the 10-point plan, that just reminded me of what Trump's original tweet on this was. Look, we declare ceasefire and we're going to negotiate based on Iran's proposed 10 points of negotiation. Like, okay, talk about flip-flop from unconditional surrender to like, let's work this out. And then, of course, the Israelis can, play all their own wild cards and scotch negotiations whenever they want. I think if Trump was very serious about making them stop, he could. And it would take more than a tweet. It would take a discussion with Netanyahu where he wins the argument and really, really, really means it. And then Netanyahu, I think, could do whatever he's told. But it would have to be like that. So he'd have to be very serious about it and really want to quit. And then, like, what the hell? Let's all give him a gold medal and throw him a ticker tape parade. And remember that tweet the other day where he was like, "See, this is another war I ended." Like, okay, whatever, man. Call it whatever you want, man. Just stop. And And because, of course, like, well, America doesn't even have anything at stake here anyway. Even if, and I know that you do nothing but interviews with all these people all day long about this stuff, so you know chapter and verse maybe better than me at this point, about what all America has lost in terms of the empire's position in the region. All of our base is called into question, all of our ability to protect all of our regional allies, whatever. And yet, any American ought to be asking, so what difference does that make to us? Why do we even care if we lose our empire in the Middle East? Show us where that even affects us. It doesn't. It's somebody else's problem if he's willing to just quit and let it be their problem. And in fact, in all seriousness, I mean, if I was to advise him, it would be just, that's it. Fly home, sail home, march home. That's it. Get the hell out of there. And then don't even say anything about it anymore. Just forget it. And then the entire burden shifts onto Iran to figure out how they're going to get along with the rest of Eurasia. And I think the answer is they're not going to pick a fight with everybody and lord their position in the Gulf to the maximum degree and make nuclear weapons and start threatening everybody, because they have too many balls to juggle than that. Even if we lifted sanctions and they're making all their money, that doesn't mean they're going to war with everybody else and all this madman Ayatollah stuff. So it really actually doesn't matter to the United States, the American people, you know, the ones who actually live here. I don't mean the interest in Washington, D.C., but like our actual country. It makes no difference to us whether we do this or, you know, whether we stop the war at this point. I don't mean it's bad. It's not bad for our country to do it. I just mean it won't be bad for our country to stop.
So if we go back to Wesley Clark's country, the 7 countries, which were he was meant to achieve regime change or take out all these countries, and he's taken out all of them except Lebanon and Iran are the 2 left standing, from what I understand. And then if you link that to the clean break, the Netanyahu memo, I think the one you've talked about in our last interview, the first time we chatted, which was aimed at weakening the regimes in the region, Syria, Iraq, and then focusing on Hezbollah, from what I understand. If you put all these together, it just seems that Iran and Lebanon are the last 2 dominoes in that multi-year, multi-decade plan to change the shape of the region. And if that's the case, then doesn't that mean the objective is regime change like with the other countries? And if that's the case, then wouldn't it be fair to argue that this was just another step in that process and it won't end until Iran becomes another Iraq or another Syria or another Libya?
Well, yes. I mean, as far as reading their motives, I think what you're talking about is the Likud doctrine, as written by David Wormser and Richard Pearl in 1996, the clean break, which says instead of dealing with the Palestinians and therefore the Arab neighbors, what we're going to do is we're going to steal Palestine. And the way we're going to deal with the neighbors is we're going to build up our military strength so that they can't mess with us. And yet the big, danger, the flaw in their total regional dominance, since they, had peace with Egypt and had peace with Jordan, which takes care of most of it. And they were working on Syria, on and off. But their major, problem to deal with, according to Wormser in the clean break and in Coping with Crumbling States and Tyranny's Ally, all written with Pearl, or I don't know if the second one was, but anyway, Coping with Crumbling States might be just by Wormser. But the point is that Hezbollah is their problem in southern Lebanon, and Iran arms Hezbollah by way of Syria. Now, their idiotic thinking was, first, we want to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And that was because they thought they would have dominance. I'll spare you some of the idiot details here, but they would have dominance over the Iraqi Shiites, and they would be able to get the Iraqi Shiite religious clergy to force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran, start being friends with Israel instead.
That's what Dave Smith brought you up, because that theory, it's like all these different theories that the people that advocate for war, they come up with, they're just so delusional. They're so far from reality. They fail, but they keep coming up with new theories that end up failing again. And we're like in that same place right now is, getting rid of Iran, the Iranian regime, or killing Khamenei would bring down the regime, and they bring down their support to Hezbollah. The same way, if you get rid of Assad, they cannot arm Hezbollah anymore. Well, the Hezbollah is still getting armed. They're still the same, probably the same, from the same, whatever you call them, throughout the same path throughout Syria. They managed to aim Hezbollah. and getting rid of Khamenei, just replacing with Khamenei with the same regime still in power in Iran. It's like everything they've recommended doesn't work, but they recommend a new crazy idea.
Yeah. In fact, well, you skipped a couple. So this was the thinking, this clean break thinking of Wormser and Pearl. These are two of the major ringleaders that got us into Iraq War II. And that idea that America would dominate the Iraqi Shia and be able to tell, did they even know Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani's name? Just the religious leadership in Najaf to tell Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and to make nice with Israel? Did they, well, I forgot how I started that sentence. Anyway, this was their idiot thinking. And then and then this is how they, this was the consensus of the neoconservatives who really confirmed to W. Bush that, hey, you know how you want to go to Baghdad? You're smart. That's a good idea. Let's do it. We've all gamed it all out and it's going to be great. So you're right to do that. And I'm not, people like to focus on the neocons, and I do too. And then others like to cry that I'm denying the agency of the Principals Committee who decided to do that war. I certainly am not, but I'm saying the reason that W. Bush, one of the major reasons he did it was because all the eggheads said, oh, we've studied this, sir, and it's going to be awesome. And this is what they were thinking. This is what they were talking about. And then what happened in the war, and I mean, Wormser worked for Cheney all during that time. What happened in that war was they empowered Iran's very best friends from the Dawa Party and the Supreme Islamic Council, and ultimately Sadr as well. But the United Iraqi Alliance that wrote the Constitution and won the elections of 2005 and took over the country and won the Civil War with the American Army and Marine Corps' help. They were all, I don't want to say like just sock puppets, but they're very close to Tehran. And in fact, they've been living in Iran for 20 years. They had chosen, Dawa and Skiri had chosen Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq War in 1980. Yeah. And so here they were 20 years later. W. Bush took them all the way to Baghdad and increased Iran's power in the region by 1 million times, man, however you want to measure it, beyond anyone's imagination. So then, Mario, that's why Obama backed al-Qaeda in Syria and backed them so damn bad with the help of Israel directly and Turkey, Saudi, Qatar, the rest. Why did they do it? They did it because they were mad at the Shiites for winning Iraq War II. So now they wanted to take Damascus away from them. And because the Alawites, the Ba'athist regime in Damascus, they're very close to the Shiites, somewhat of a breakoff group of the Shiites and allies with Iran and Hezbollah. So if we just put them up 2 pegs in Baghdad, now we got to take them down a peg in Damascus. But then that didn't work. Remember what happened? Instead of ISIS sacking Damascus, ISIS sacked all of Western Iraq and created the Islamic State Caliphate, where then we had to fight Iraq War III from 2014 through 18, again on Iran and the Iraqi Shiite side to destroy the caliphate again. Yeah, they suck at this, man. They're really bad at this. Now, but wait a minute. So let me wrap this up.
Let me, as you wrap it up, just so you know, Israel, according to Al Jazeera, Israel is preparing to announce the failure of negotiations with Iran that just came in, according to Al Jazeera.
Well, I don't think they were invited. We'll see how that goes, but yeah, I'm not betting on them, but okay, so now look, after October 7th, then Israel decided, okay, this is their chance. And they, of course, rained absolute holy hell on the people of the Palestinian people of the Gaza Strip. But they did not succeed really in destroying Hamas, although I think everybody could agree that they set them back a hell of a lot. I mean, they killed, many, many tens of thousands of civilians, but they killed a hell of a lot of fighters too. And then the same with Hezbollah, although I think we've seen they kind of overestimated how badly they had hurt Hezbollah during that war. Now they're
I overestimated how damaged Hezbollah was. I thought Hezbollah was almost completely eradicated as a military wing. And look at them now.
Well, yeah, I would have never gone that far, but it was obvious. I mean, they did kill their very crucial charismatic leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and they took out a lot of middle management and fighters with the pager attack. And they had, of course, done a lot of airstrikes. So I think we can all agree they had been weakened. And then they helped at the end of 24. Netanyahu and Joe Biden took credit as Al-Qaeda, right? Like 4 clicks more, well, hell, at least 3 clicks more radical than Hamas, broke out and did their own October 7th and broke out of their Gaza Strip up there in the Idlib province and sacked Damascus. And American Israel celebrated it as Al-Qaeda drove the secular Ba'athist regime out of power there. And that was a major win. So look, they weakened Hamas, they weakened Hezbollah, they got the hell rid of Assad. And so at that point, everything's coming up Netanyahu, man. We're on a roll. Don't stop me now. Let's go ahead and get him while it's good. And then, as we all know, he just told Trump the same thing Trump repeats, right? Only you are tough and strong and wise and brave enough to do what must be done. George W. Bush wasn't man enough to do it. Obama wasn't man enough to do it, but you are, because you're so brave and strong and you're such a great leader. You're like Abraham Lincoln. Hell, you're like Abraham. You're so important and crucial and handsome and tall. And then he was like, okay, you're right. Let's do it. The red line is enrichment at all if Israel says so. And, and then that was it. But as everyone can see, they just, it really backfired on the level so far, at least. We don't know how bad it's going to go. I think it'll only get worse, but this is already, Mario, I think, equivalent to George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq in 2003, in terms of increasing Iranian power and influence in the region. And, Obama did drive Assad into Iran's arms, and that did last for 15 years. But then they lost anyway, ultimately there. But in terms of their influence in the Gulf, I mean, it's hard to even assess, right? But like, put yourself in the shoes of you're there in the UAE, so maybe you can better inform me. But I'm putting myself in the shoes of every sultan and emir and king and el presidente and potentate over there. And I'm saying, you know what? I don't think I can believe that the United States of America can't protect me. So it looks like I better make a deal with the dominant force in the region. It's called the Persian Gulf for a reason, after all,
So putting all these pieces together, again, no one covers this like you and has covered this for as long as you have. So putting all these pieces together, because you look at it from a lens, we look at it, what happened last month, what Trump said yesterday. You look at it from like what happened in the last few years and decades. So with your lens, what would you expect to happen next?
Oh man, I don't know.
I know you hate doing it, but I really want to press you for it because I think your predictions, considering how rare you make them, and I know you'll change them as new information comes out. Yeah. But what wouldn't surprise you if it happens? If that's a better way to word it.
Well, listen, I mean, I wouldn't dispute what the colonel was saying there. That prepare for things to get worse because Trump's painted himself into this idiot corner. I mean, I guess my kind of rote answer that I've been telling people is like, man, if only we could just call a no confidence vote and elect a new prime minister who didn't do it and let him figure out how to solve this. But instead, we're stuck with this same guy who...
A new prime minister, you're talking about Netanyahu?
Him too. But I mean Donald Trump, right? Like in the United States, the guy who called the shot is the same guy who essentially is maybe doing a lot of work here, but essentially can't end the war without admitting that he lost it, without just completely climbing down.
I thought you were saying Netanyahu because you said electing you prime minister, so I got a bit confused.
No, but that's what I mean. That's what I mean, because we don't have a prime minister here. We have this idiot Article 2 that says that this guy can stay president even after he lies us in a war and loses it. This is the story of my life, man. It's happened over and over and over again since I was a teenager. They just lie us in a war, and then they still get to sit there and keep taxing me. It drives me crazy. That's how they do it. And so, but my point being, right, that like, if you could just, magic wish and just have someone else sitting there who wasn't the one who started this war, then that person could easily end it. Because the whole thing is stupid and there are no real crucial American interests at stake, only imperial interests, but none that truly affect the American people. So we would all just be so much better off if we just cut and ran and said, forget it. And like, fine, don't even say sorry, but be sorry, but just
why not do this? Everyone says that's the best option. Everyone that has America's interests at heart and understands what's happening says that. Why not do it?
Like that happen. I can't predict it, but this is the lowest friction solution, right?
It is.
The problem is politics, Mario, right? Like on one hand you have what would you do? It makes sense to just completely abandon the mission, pull everyone away and shift the entire burden of resolving the situation onto Tehran and let them deal with all the other countries that need those energy resources and whatever. And then the burden will be on them. They're not going to just whatever. I would place bets that it'd be fine. And yet to do that though is to cross, that's serving the interests of the American people. That is to really cross powerful interests, especially the Israelis, but the entire war machine too. You know, they don't
Big
want
oil,
to come over in the Middle East.
complex.
The Pentagon is the empire, right? We don't have colonies of like where we transplant the people of Arkansas to go and be the dominant ethnic group in like India or Mesopotamia or whatever. The empire is basically served as from weapons transfers from the American taxpayer to the Pentagon, right? Like that's what it is. We buy weapons for them. And it's a huge part of things. So if you want to start pivoting home, then you're going to set off alarm bells everywhere as far as every entrenched power, in the Pentagon itself. And then of course, all of the contractors and arms merchants who serve them.
What would it take for Israel to change their foreign policy? Their approach to the region?
Look, I don't really know a whole lot about like public sentiment and politics in Israel.
It's not good. It's not good.
It seems, pretty dismal, right? There's some liberals in Tel Aviv who are probably the best you're going to get. But like, I even saw where the libertarians there's like even an official libertarian party, and they're complete lunatic, genocidal maniacs, right? So I forgot the exact quote, but it was really bad stuff. So I think that I don't know, man. I don't. Well, okay, no, I do know. The answer is the American government, at the absolute insistence of the American people, would have to cut them off, and they would have to pay their own way in the world. They'd have to figure out their own way to somehow veto UN Security Council resolutions condemning their illegal behavior and respect the property rights of the Palestinians who they slaughter and steal from. And look, even the entire basis of the clean break, the entire thing is dependent on the United States helping them do all this stuff. Netanyahu's Israel in 1996 and 1997 had no ability to do a regime change in Baghdad. It was all about what to get America to do. And same with, it was in a debate with me on the Piers Morgan show where Wesley Clark admitted that the clean break was resurrected as that 7-country memo. Like that's essentially confirming that's the same thinking by the same very small group of men, the neoconservatives. And I've heard people say, I think maybe this came up in one of Dave Smith's debates with Coleman, I believe is his name. They're like, oh yeah, but no, Rumsfeld notoriously sent memos every day about everything. They were called snowflakes, and they would just flutter around the Pentagon, and people eventually learned to stop paying any attention to them. I know all about that. I've read plenty of books about what was going on at that time. And that's true, that there were these things called snowflakes where Rumsfeld would just muse something and say, jot that down and tell somebody I said do it, and then whatever. But there's no reason in the world to think that the memo that the guy was addressing to Wesley Clark was just another one of those silly little old things. The point is, and we know they did not do 7 countries in 5 years. They couldn't. But the point is that it's like besides arguing kind of around the point. The point is, on Donald Rumsfeld's staff were Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith and Bill Luty and Abram Shulsky and all these neoconservatives, and Richard Pearl was the chair of the Defense Policy Board, and David Wormser, of course, was running around from defense to state to the vice president's office, and you had this whole group of guys at the Pentagon, and this is what they were talking, and in the vice president's office, in National Security Council especially, and this is what they were talking about, was we're going to do Israel's entire laundry list of countries. And you know what, man? I don't know if anybody has this, but I'll bring it up because I know this is true, dude. I saw it, and it was some 9/11 truthers who had it. And like, I don't necessarily have to follow their conclusions on that, but I saw the video. There is video out there of the afternoon of September 11th. Ehud Barak was in London on the BBC. And he said, well, it's clear. It's time to launch the war on terrorism. And then we'll have to do Hezbollah and Iraq and Assad and Gaddafi and whatever. And he goes down the whole list. This is the war on terrorism begins now. Before W. Bush even had a chance to declare war against fear or whatever it was from the Oval Office that night. Ehud Barak was already on the case. And he's Labor, right? Jeffrey Epstein's buddy. He's not even the Likud, who we think of as, I think correctly, as more nationalist and militant than the so-called Labor left under Ehud Barak at that time. He was their last major leader that they had. They hardly exist anymore at all now. But so, and look, I mean, it was in the air at the time, man. You know, the Council on Foreign Relations had the Gary Hart Commission on shouldn't we create a Department of Homeland Security because of the threat of bin Ladenite terrorism. Like, everybody knew it's the war on terrorism era is coming. And Bill Clinton was sort of kind of getting it going, but we needed a new century to come and a new presidency. And I'm not, man, I'm only 1%. Okay, I'm like 7% truther or whatever. Like, it was Al-Qaeda that did it. Obviously, Saudi helped them do it. I don't know if the Americans really were in on that or not. I know a lot of people believe a lot of things about it, but they sure exploited it to get away with
exactly the same as October 7th. Like, I was having a discussion with a great journalist. You should meet him. He was on Tucker a couple of weeks ago. Ari something, I forgot his name. And he was very objective and analytical about everything. Very knowledgeable. I enjoyed the conversation. I wanted to understand October 7th, the whole stand down orders, etc. And from what I understand is that these things happen. They're not planned by Israel and Netanyahu. It takes a lot to plan those things. Obviously, we don't know for sure, but it's more about taking advantage of the situation, exploiting the situation to achieve certain objectives. So, for example, Hezbollah did attack Israel, and Israel's exploiting the attacks to justify another goal they have, another objective they have when it comes to Lebanon, which includes potentially annexing Lebanese territory, which now I'm more worried about that now than I was before. It's like my biggest worry, though, is what would it take, Scott? Because you said something earlier that is true. It's like, for Israel to change, we can't expect Israel itself to change. It's more the US forcing Israel to look at things differently by not offering it that impunity, that unconditional support. So what would it take for the US administration to change their approach to Israel and put America's interests above Israel's? Is it maybe happening now? Could it happen right now? Trump is ticked off by this war, how he's stuck in a war that he shouldn't be in, that Mossad and maybe Netanyahu convinced him or tricked him into getting into, and he could flip on them. Isn't that possible? I seem to be the only one saying that. No one agreed with me, but I'm being hopeful. But yeah, like, it just makes sense as well. Like, if I was Trump, I'd be fuming at Israel. I don't care if I have my donors. I'm already can't run again.
I agree with that.
That would be, and that's the only way to get. That's the only way to turn this war, this political catastrophe, into something positive before the midterms. Like, just to begin the process of cracking down even slightly on Israeli aggression or sabotage.
Well, look, I mean, I agree with you that he must be pissed off that they sold him this bill of goods. He was buying it, but I'm sure he probably does resent that, but enough to counteract every other thing, I don't know. I just don't see it, especially not from him, right? Like, the idea is that he is emotional enough that he would do something, in anger or whatever about it, but I just don't see it, man. And then, so what is it going to take? What is going to take? Look, man, I hate talking about this stuff because people always think like I'm Schoolhouse Rock trying to sell democracy to you or whatever. But the thing of it is, for what it's worth, on the margin here, the way they designed the Constitution, the House of Representatives is elected locally. So we have 435 separate House districts, and the Senate isn't even supposed to be directly elected. They're supposed to be elected by the state legislatures to, for them to be protective of their own interests at the expense of the national government. Is the way it's supposed to be. But anyway, the House of Representatives It's not like they all run in one big national election. Where there are 435 tiny little house races and 51% wins. And I was just reading an article by Jose Nino this morning about how there's a guy. In fact, man, let me pull it up. Go ahead and I don't know much about this guy except they seem like they were falsely accusing him of some stuff. But he
is that the former? Is that the former
here it is,
president?
Brandon Herrera. I thought that was it. It's Brandon
no.
Herrera. He's running for the House of Representatives in Houston. He says, look, Israel's not even his issue, but he'll be damned if he's going to be bullied about it. And he doesn't want to spend any more money on Israel. And he's running for Congress. And what happened was that guy Gonzalez, who had pressured his staffer into an affair, and then she burned herself to death, for God's sake, that guy was forced to resign. So now this guy is virtually assured to win this primary and be the or what I might be telling wrong. Maybe the primary is already over, or I forgot what it is. But anyway, Brandon Herrera is an avowedly forget you Israel Republican candidate, and they're smearing him as a neo-Nazi and all of these things. But apparently, you know, he's in a real strong position and could win. And I think
I'm going to message him now. It seems to me the team chatted to him. He's been on the show. I'm going to actually ping him now. Not now during the interview, like right after this. I'll tell the team to kind of get an interview with him if you recommend it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know anything about the guy other than the article by Jose Nino today. I recommend everybody read Jose Nino. He's great. He's one of our guys at the Libertarian Institute, but this is on his Substack. And I think, look, man, as you know, so many people's opinion of Israel changed because everybody's just kind of sold this line like, oh, they're our friends and they're whiter and they speak English and they're nice and whatever and they're our guys and then it's just sort of taken for granted. But then you look at the abject cruelty, just the over the top barbarianism of Israel's actions in Palestine over the last few years, and then now dragging us into this war at a time where, man, it's as simple as this, Mario, okay? You could quote me, okay? At a time of price inflation, when people can't pay their bills and prices of everything keep going up and up and up because the value of the money keeps going down and down and down because our government keeps giving all of our wealth to somebody else other than us. And people are just so pissed. It's not about being greedy. That's our money. It's not like, oh, we want them to give us money. We want them to stop taking our money and giving it to other people in faraway countries to kill each other with. Enough of this, dude. Nobody believes in this anymore. And in Washington, they don't give a damn. They all, all the wealthiest counties in America now are outside Washington, D.C., not New York City, not, Beverly Hills, but contractor land in Northern Virginia. These are the people who are making most of the money. They're just looting the treasury. It doesn't bother them at all. But the rest of the American people are absolutely sick of it. And if you change the word Israel to any other country, whether it's Ukraine or, the pseudo nation of Taiwan or anybody else, the American people want to spend more hundreds of billions of dollars on other people's conflicts. The consensus is no. And it really has been, especially since the end of the Cold War. Even in Iraq War I, people had never heard of Kuwait. We're going to fight a war to restore His Royal Highness Al Jaber to the throne. Are you kidding me? Nobody cared about that. They didn't support that war until the focus groups figured out that if you tell them Saddam's going to nuke them in their jammies, then they'll support a war. Now, it's the only way they can get the American people to get behind any of this stuff is, oh, they're going to threaten you with nuclear weapons. Oh, the weapons of mass destruction. Without that, the American people would rather just leave the world alone. They have to constantly badger us with this propaganda. So I do think that, look, I don't think that democracy works, everybody. Get involved and go testify to your local legislature. They'll listen to you and pass a law. But no. But what I am saying is American public opinion matters, at least on the margin. But that's where all the action is. Oh, you know what? Let me ramble one more thing about that. You've probably at least heard of and maybe have read. It's a pretty infamous Rand Corporation study from 2019 called Extending Russia. And it's where by that they mean overextending Russia. By that they mean provoking Russia into overextending itself. That's what they're saying with that, right? So that, and then all the sections in there are, what can we do to force the Russians to have to expand their commitments? So that'll cost them money and time and energy in order to keep them off balance. And they talk about stopping Nord Stream 2. They talk about attempting another coup in Belarus, which they actually did in 2020. They talk about fomenting some kind of uprising in Kazakhstan, which they did in January 2022. They talk about increasing support for the Ukrainian military, which would cause them to build up and cause Russia to have to increase their costs in Ukraine. This is 2019, this study. And they said we could increase support to the jihadists in Syria. And all of these things would help, coerce the Russians into having to expand their commitments in these countries. And then, very importantly, for us at least, apparently not the Biden administration, but very importantly, or even Trump 1, very importantly for us, every one of those recommendations has a giant, fat, bold disclaimer that says, warning, don't listen to us. If you do this, here are all the likely consequences if you do, right? And then I forgot what they say about the Nord Stream thing. Maybe just piss off the Germans or whatever. If we try another coup in Belarus, that could get a lot of innocent people hurt, and it could expand Russia's military footprint in Belarus, which we don't want that. So that would be counterproductive. We could pour a bunch of weapons into Ukraine, and that might, increase Russian costs, but they might actually, forgive me, but they might actually invade the country and destroy it and cost and cause a major war and cost us tens of billions of dollars too. We don't want that. And then, geez, we could increase support for the jihadists, but then they could take over Syria. And are we sure we want that? Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm off on a tangent. I just want people to read that dang study. But here's the point that I was going to say, was all throughout that study also, Mario, it says, but you know what, if we do this, the German people are going to be really upset. The polls say that the Germans won't stand for it. Or the French on this issue, they're very against this. Or the American people have said repeatedly in polls that they'll support this, but they won't support that. And I have to tell you, when I read that part of that report, I was actually surprised and impressed that, in fact, I maybe even think that they were being naive, that it matters what the American people think or not. Maybe they were. But at least at the Rand Corporation, which was created by the Pentagon, it's directly connected to the Pentagon, even though it's out in California. They put it there so it'd be a little separate from the pressures of the East Coast, but would study the exact same type topics and stuff. From their point of view, public opinion in these Western democracies matters. If the American people won't stand for it, they won't stand for it. The problem is building that consensus and getting people to stand firm. Like on Afghanistan, I joked in my first book that Afghanistan was the least popular and least opposed war in American history. Right? People would not support it, but they didn't give a damn about it. It went on for 20 years, and in public opinion polls, they would ask the open-ended question, what are your top concerns for America? And they'd have like the top 30 answers, and Afghanistan wouldn't even be on there anywhere. Even though nobody supported the war, nobody thought it was an emergency, So that's the problem of being the
indifference. Indifference allows them, it gives them the ability to do what they're doing. People don't have to approve of a war; they just have to not care about it. Obviously, this Iran war is very different. People do give a shit because it's impacting their bank accounts.
Oh man, I'm sorry. I
know you do. I know.
Was calling me on
exactly
because I'm late.
Exactly. My team is like, he's 7 minutes late. I'm like, guys, I can't interrupt them. Scott,
my God.
Pleasure to have you. All right, jump on, man. Jump on.
Thank you, brother. To be here with you again, dude. Thank you.
All good, brother. All good.
Next
all right,
time.
guys, we've got Karim. We've got Karim Bitar now in the studio. He's coming up any second. The team is setting him up to talk about what's happening in Lebanon. I'll just give you a quick update on the news, give you a recap. So there was a report that just came out while I was speaking to Scott Horton that Israel, according to Al Jazeera, Israel's preparing to announce the failure of negotiations with Iran. Now, it's very bizarre why Israel's going to announce the failure of negotiations between the US and Iran. But I think for Israel to do this, I'd be surprised if they do it. It's a very weird piece of news to come out of Al Jazeera, but for Israel to say something like this, I'm sure they're doing it at the behest of Trump. Not sure if it's Trump, kind of bluffing again against Iran in the negotiations, or this is the beginning of setting the stage for kinetic action that's been planned. I know I'm usually an optimistic person. If you guys follow me on X, I've been saying for a while the war is over. I might put out a post right now, today after my interviews, that the war may not be over. I'm starting to change my mind based on the developments and how the negotiations are going. So we have Karim that will be coming on any second. Then we have Aaron David Miller, as I've said earlier. He's one of my favorite guests. He's been part of all these negotiations in the region. And his intake into his insight into this is one of the best. And then lastly, and I'm really excited for that conversation to see what he thinks of the negotiations and what could happen next. Probably the most experienced person when it comes to such negotiations I've ever had on the show. And lastly, we have Dimitri Lascaris to wrap up the marathon today, who is a great journalist who's been to Iran during the war, been to Lebanon during the war, very vocal opponent of U.S. foreign policy, and someone that doesn't mind getting heated with me when he disagrees with something. And we got heated last time when it came to Hezbollah. Let me give you guys a quick news recap. Lisa, you can bring up Karim whenever he's ready. But in terms of the news, so Khamenei, the new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, and released his statement on the negotiations. And it's more of a declaration of victory rather than anything indicating concessions whatsoever. So he frames, that's a summary written by my team, frames Iran as the Gulf's historic defender, from expelling Portugal to resisting British colonialism. So this is the supreme leader of Iran saying, this is the beginning of a new era, a post-US empire era. That's beyond. So this is like another level to controlling the Strait of Hormuz and having the US withdraw their bases from the region. This is saying that we now control the Persian Gulf and we're going to defend you. Like, I don't know how you could expect the war to be over when you've got Trump wanting to declare victory somehow, and you've got the supreme leader of Iran in that mindset. He then calls the Islamic Revolution the turning point that ended foreign domination of the region. So he's doubling down on the foundation of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Says the last 60 days proved Iran's naval forces can stand up to the world's biggest military. Obviously, I disagree with that. There's no real naval forces, just more mines and small boats. I would say proved Iran's military, not naval forces, can stand up to the world's biggest military. That I would agree with. Declares America's presence, quote, the most important cause of insecurity in the Gulf. So this is a concern that a lot of my guests have been making. I've been saying in the early days of the war, is that this war could make having U.S. bases a liability for countries in the region. And this is the argument that the supreme leader is trying to make. Says U.S. bases are too fragile to protect even themselves, let alone their Gulf allies. So it seems Iran is doubling down on not having U.S. bases in the region anymore. That's not good. Announces new management of the Strait of Hormuz that will bring peace and economic benefits to all Gulf nations. So at least it's positive. He's looking at potentially improving relations with the Gulf. That's extending the olive branch to the Gulf nations, at least in theory, based on this speech. Quote, the bright future of the Persian Gulf will be without America. Again, doubling down on not having U.S. bases. Foreigners who maliciously covet from thousands of kilometers away have no place there except at the bottom of its waters. It's a threat to the U.S. If you're going to enforce your interests in the region, you're going to be at the bottom of the waters. And last point, calls this moment, quote, the dawn of a new regional and global order. So we've got the supreme leader there, Karim, doubling down on the foundation of the Islamic Revolution. You've got Trump considering military action against Iran. You've got Iran, instead of giving concessions since the Pakistan talks, becoming more demanding or giving even less concessions than what they were initially after the war. And you've got Trump's rhetoric not changing. In the meantime, we do have a very fragile ceasefire when it comes to Lebanon, ceasefire in theory. But you've got Israel leveled villages in South Lebanon. In our first discussion, me and you had echoed a similar concern. We're both very critical of Hezbollah, but we're also very concerned about Israel. And it seems that those concerns are materializing. And you've got a report now from Al Jazeera that Israel will declare the Iran negotiations to have failed. I don't know where that report comes from. It came about half an hour ago. So you put all these things together, Karim, and it's not, I'm usually the optimistic one, but it's not looking good.
Indeed, Mario, thank you for having me. It's always good to be with you. I'm increasingly pessimistic. As you said, Israel has literally leveled and destroyed more than 47 villages, while 62 villages lie behind the so-called the Green Line, and Israeli statements every single day in English and very often in Hebrew say that Israel has no intention of withdrawing from these villages. They want to maintain a presence along the Green Line and possibly create a junction with the areas that they already occupy in Syria. Initially, the Golan Heights was supposed to be a buffer zone, and then they wanted a buffer zone around the buffer zone. So now they have literally annexed a significant part of Syrian territory. So I'm worried about a policy that is leading the entire region toward chaos and fragmentation. Of all the countries in the region, Lebanon is the one I'm most worried about, not because it is my native country, but it is the weakest link. You know, there is an old African proverb that says, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Throughout history, Lebanon was the grass where foreign, regional, and international powers came to settle their scores. And now we have a massive Israeli-Iranian proxy war taking place on Lebanese territory. Hezbollah is now under direct operational control from the IRGC. We are getting confirmation every single day that they are no longer running the show, the Lebanese Hezbollah leaders. Iranians are directly calling the shots. Israel is maintaining these maximalist positions. And what both have to worry about is what your previous guest was talking about, the risk of overextension. You know, when you analyze the Middle East, we often need to keep in mind the pattern that was identified by Yale historian Paul Kennedy more than 20 years ago. He wrote a book called The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. And he said very often, you initially succumb to hubris, you become drunk with your own power, you think you can wage war simultaneously on several fronts. When you succumb to hubris, you immediately go into imperial overstretch. And this imperial overreach ends up leading to decline. So this was true for the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and it significantly contributed to weakening it and to the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was also true to a certain extent for the United States after 9/11, invading Afghanistan, invading Iraq, and seeing the deficit and the debt become increasingly high and US credibility increasingly low. And this accelerated the rise of the rest, the rise of Russia, China, etc. It is also true, this theory of hubris leading to imperial overreach, leading to decline. It can also be true for regional powers like Israel. Israel is waging wars on 5 or 6 fronts simultaneously: Lebanon, Syria, Iran, possibly Yemen, the West Bank, Gaza, etc. And they no longer have the manpower. The Israeli army chief of staff a few weeks ago said the army is at risk of collapse. And this same theory also applies to non-state actors like Hezbollah. Hezbollah also succumbed to hubris after the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000. And Hezbollah thought that it could exert hegemony not only in Lebanon, but also go help Bashar al-Assad in 2011 crack down on the protest movement after a request from the Iranian Supreme Guide. We also know that it was the Iranians who forced or asked Hezbollah to go in Syria. Hezbollah has also been training rebels in Yemen, has also trying to expand its operations in several countries. And this ultimately led to its decline and to its failure to block any of the Israeli attempts to assassinate its leaders in 2004. Now they have learned some of the lessons apparently from 2004. They are showing some resistance in South Lebanon, but they will definitely not be able to sustain a massive Israeli campaign because Israel intends to go all the way. So Lebanon is really at risk of being torn apart. the country is extremely polarized. You have people like you and I who are critical of Israel and critical of Hezbollah simultaneously. But you also have on both extremes 20% of people who are really becoming very distressed, succumbing to wishful thinking. Some think that Netanyahu is going to get rid of Hezbollah and that they are going to live happily ever after. And others think that Hezbollah is able to protect Lebanon from a new Israeli invasion. But over 70 or 80% of the Lebanese population is extremely worried. They are worried about their country's unity, social cohesion. They are afraid of civil strife. They see that their sovereignty has become more elusive than ever and that their territorial integrity is at risk. So we're talking about 15% of the Lebanese territory, and we're talking of over 1.3 million refugees. Every single day there are incidents in other areas. And I'm afraid in a part of the world where you have the existential angst of religious minorities being very present, these minorities, this anguish could be instrumentalized by foreign powers, Israel or others, to create a situation where Lebanon would go back to the 1970s and 1980s. Now, I do not want people to freak out and think that civil war is imminent. We should not succumb to this.
Is it likely? Is it likely?
Well, I think there are two scenarios that we have to be cautious about. One, we should not underestimate the risk of civil strife, but we also should not succumb to Hezbollah's rhetoric that says if the Lebanese Authority insists on restoring the sovereignty on the entire territory, sending the Lebanese army, it will immediately create civil war. So we have to be cautious. We have to worry about those radicals. We have to preserve Lebanese unity and social cohesion, but we should not succumb to blackmail. Hezbollah cannot keep telling the other Lebanese, do not come close, do not try to assert your sovereignty, otherwise it will be a civil war immediately. What I'm worried about is the potential new political assassinations. Hezbollah used to issue thinly veiled threats. Now it's becoming very blunt. They are threatening the president and the prime minister. They are telling them your fate will be similar to Anwar al-Sadat's fate. Sadat was assassinated shortly after signing peace with Israel.
You mentioned something earlier that Israel is becoming overstretched. What is its biggest threat right now? You've got Hamas has been significantly weakened. The Houthis were never really a threat. Assad is gone. The militias in Iraq and Syria are even weaker than the Houthis, much weaker than the Houthis. You've got Hezbollah and you've got Iran. Iran is a lot more emboldened, but very limping after this war. However, they may come out a lot stronger. They might come out as a regional, if not global superpower. So it's going to be a very different Iran, one that may stand up to Israel more than it did before. Maybe not through proxies anymore, may have more leverage beyond just proxies. And you've got Hezbollah, which was very powerful. It's the weakest it's ever been right now, or in many decades. But it's supported by a new superpower in the region that may make it stronger over the next few years. It's significantly armored again. So Israel is overextended, but what is its bigger threat? Is the threat from outside? Is it Hezbollah? Is it Iran? Or is it from within?
This was what I was about to say. You are mentioning several important strategic threats, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, a nuclear Iran. But ultimately, the major crisis that Israel could face could come from its domestic politics. Particularly the increasing number and influence of ultra-Orthodox Jews who do not study Mass, who do not study English at all. They are going to represent 25-30% of the population in only 10 years from now. That's tomorrow morning when it comes to international relations. So there are a series of strategic threats, but none is existential. because Israel is a very strong country. Israel has obtained no less than $300 billion from the United States since 1948. Israel already has at least 80 nuclear warheads, maybe 300 according to some experts. So Israel is not at risk of being destroyed. However, we have to keep in mind the psychology of people in Israel who are extremely worried, extremely afraid because of the traumas of Jewish history in the 20th century, because they survived the Holocaust. They tend to perceive any threat as an existential threat. Any enemy becomes a potential new Hitler, so they need to exterminate it before they are attacked. So personally, I think Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran represent a strategic threat to Israel, but it is by no means an existential threat. Israel is thriving economically, even in the midst of this war. Inflation is under control. The stock market is doing okay. They are still getting full support from the United States. The main threat to Israel is the change in public perceptions toward Israel in the United States. For the first time in history, a couple of weeks ago, the Financial Times published an opinion poll, I think it was by Ipsos, saying that Americans who sympathize with Palestinians are now have now exceeded the number of those who sympathize with Israel. This could have been unthinkable 20 years ago. And even within the American Jewish community, many are distancing themselves from Netanyahu. They view Netanyahu as an extremist, nationalist, hell-bent on destroying the rule of law, domesticating the checks and balances, the Supreme Court, and waging a foreign policy that is counterproductive at best. So American Jews are becoming increasingly critical. Many even use the word genocide to describe what is happening in Gaza, a significant number, about 40%. And when you look at the figures, at the demographics, Americans between 18 and 29 are extremely critical of Israel. So this generation is going to arrive to political office 10 or 15 years from now, and Israel will no longer be able to get this blank check from the United States, this blind and unconditional support that have allowed it to wage all these wars in the past 60 years. Because the main problem is that Israel paid absolutely no cost for its continuing policy of occupation, settlements in the West Bank, persecution of minorities. There were some incidents this past week of Christians being attacked. A Catholic nun was brutalized in Jerusalem. A cross, a statue of Jesus Christ was vandalized. So Israel is trying to put together some hasbara, some propaganda effort to counter this. They have appointed a special envoy to deal with the Christian world. But the image of Israel in the United States is significantly different than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I was a student, you only had a few marginal voices criticizing Israel on the radical fringes, like people like Noam Chomsky or Norman Finkelstein. Now we have mainstream figures, you hosted some of them, who are critical and who are influential opinion makers in the United States.
Yeah. So when you say, so Israel's biggest threat is not from within, but it's US support, or the absence of US support, or a change of US foreign policy.
And it's also from within. You know, Henry Kissinger had a formula. He said Israel has no foreign policy, only domestic politics. What he meant by that is that very often it is the domestic political concerns that end up influencing foreign policy. And this has been true in the past 2 or 3 years. Netanyahu was so desperate to maintain his coalition, he kept making concessions to Ben Gvir and Smotrich and others. Some people describe him as hostage to these extremists. Actually, he's not hostage. He is fully aware of this. He shares a significant part of their ideology. He also said that he looked fondly on the idea of a greater Israel. But the more radicalized the Israeli population becomes, the messianic sectors of Israeli society are going to grow stronger. And as I said, these are factors that will ultimately define Israeli policy towards Lebanon, towards Syria. And Israel might be trying to reactivate its so-called periphery doctrine, meaning trying to build bridges with countries that are not Arab, Iran under the Shah, Turkey under the generals, Haile Selassie's Ethiopia in the past. Now they have excellent relationship with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a key Shiite ally of Israel. Azerbaijan contributed to crushing Armenians a few years ago in Nagorno-Karabakh with Israeli weapons. And Israel is also playing on the existential fears of all minorities in the region, particularly today the Druze in Syria, in Suwaida. Some of them has open relationship with Israel. The Kurds in northern Iraq, there is a CIA and a Mossad base in Erbil. This is why Iran has been bombing Erbil so frequently during this war. And potentially even in North Africa, you have the Amazigh movements who are sometimes also penetrated by Israel. So the idea is to lead the Middle East towards a path where you have small ethnic states that represent no threat to Israel. And even when it comes to Iran, Israel would view it favorably if there is state collapse, chaos. They're not necessarily after regime change. They want a weakened Iran that would no longer represent a threat. But the Israelis should be cautious. They could get more than they bargained for, because a weak neighbor is not necessarily an inoffensive neighbor. This fragmentation could lead to radicalization, to a new generation that is not controlled by strong state authorities and that could turn against Israel. This is the famous blowback effect. The United States supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. They ended up paying the price. So Israel should be extremely cautious of this blowback effect. Its own security could be undermined by its willingness to continually go in this headlong rush.
So if you have US support for Israel change, so you're saying Israel would be in a position where it's forced to change its approach to other countries, to neighboring countries, not only non-Arab countries like Iran and Turkey and Azerbaijan, but also Arab countries. You saw the UAE doubling down on their relationship with Israel, but expanding that strategy. Obviously the intention behind that alliance is to deter Iranian aggression. But could we see similar alliances with other Arab countries, maybe forced to find a solution for the Palestine problem? Solving the Syria and Lebanon problem, which should be a lot easier if the US changes their approach to Israel. And a lot of people are saying Israel has like a very small window of capitalizing on US support before their time is up, before the new generation takes power. So could we see like a lot of instability over the next few years with Israel knowing that's their last window to expand before they have to coexist?
Possibly. This is why Israel is adopting such a maximalist line and is getting closer and closer with the United Arab Emirates. But with the exception of the UAE and Bahrain, very few Arab countries or Middle Eastern countries would be supportive of a full-fledged normalization or peace accords with Israel. What is very significant is the Saudi positioning. Saudi Arabia is becoming increasingly worried about this regional hegemony replacing the Iranian hegemony. Saudi Arabia is getting closer to Egypt, to Pakistan, to Turkey. What these nations have in common is that they are worried about regional stability. They are in favor of a status quo. They do not want to see state collapse. Turkey for historical reasons, because it's worried about Kurdish autonomy. Saudi Arabia, because they know that they needed historically to protect their sovereignty, their territorial integrity. Saudi Arabia is the only country in the region that was not colonized. So it is a force playing today in the favor of the preservation of Syria and Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the Crown Prince, MBS, went as far as suggesting that the Arab and Muslim world should create some sort of NATO-like alliance in order to face the Iranian threat, but also the fact that the United States will not be able to protect them on the long term.
Why is the UAE not doing the complete opposite, leaving OPEC, threatening to leave the Arab League and the other league, I can't remember their name, doubling down on their relationship with the US and even Israel? What is the UAE strategy in all this?
Well, the UAE has had strong relations with Israel for over 20 or 30 years. Initially, it was under the table, technology transfers, intelligence cooperation, economic deals. Now it has become official public policy. But they can afford to do this because they do not have to worry about their public opinion. As you know, only 10% of those who live in the United Arab Emirates are actually citizens. Most others are expat workers. Saudi Arabia has to deal with a population of over 30 million, which is overwhelmingly hostile to the normalization process. An opinion poll by Brookings showed that 96% of Saudis were hostile to normalization with Israel until Palestinians get a fair treatment and get a Palestinian state. This is why, even though ideologically MBS is not hostile to peace, he would have been ready to move forward, but he understood when he saw the social media in his countries. Saudis are very active on Twitter. Many of them, when the capital was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the most popular hashtag on Arabic Twitter was "Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Palestine." So even though when their government was negotiating with Israel, public opinion was reluctant. And MBS has to take into consideration this public feeling that has become even more hostile when they see images of Gaza day after day, and now images of South Lebanon, where Israel is not simply attacking Hezbollah, but literally trying to empty southern Lebanon of all its inhabitants. Israel is using white phosphorus, is using herbicides, is using all sorts of methods to empty Lebanon of its population in the south. Whereas when they occupied it for 22 years between 1978 and 2000, they relied on an auxiliary militia and people did not have to leave. Now they are telling people, you have to leave the south and not come back.
Are they planning, do you think they're planning to annex South Lebanon? Like, seeing them level those villages was a shock to me. That was a massive escalation from their strategy with Lebanon for years.
Yes, I'm genuinely worried about this, even though it's not officially their announced policy. Some ministers who are more influential than we think are already talking about permanent occupation in the case of Israel Katz, or about annexation in the case of Smotrich. Usually what happens, like what happened in Syria, in the Golan in 1967, you occupy it, you maintain occupation, and then only 15 or 25 years later, you annex it. Now they are talking about annexation from day one. And this is not something new. In the 1950s, Israeli leaders wrote it very clearly, David Ben-Gurion and Moshe Sharet, that the Litani River has to be the northern border of Israel. It was no longer the case in the 1990s. You see, again, domestic politics plays a very important role in defining the foreign objectives. In the 1990s, you had Yitzhak Rabin and then Ehud Barak. Even the Meretz, which was a secular center-left party, was influential. With the Arab parties and the Labour, they had 62 seats in the Knesset. Now it's a completely different Israel. So this new Israel that we have today, that is drifting towards extreme messianist rhetoric, might very well be tempted a few years down the road to establish a permanent presence in Lebanon.
That's
so
crazy.
This is underestimated.
Do you worry that this could escalate into something regional? You've got Iran and the US at a stalemate. The negotiations don't seem to be going well at all. You've got the Gulf countries not agreeing either. You've got the instability in Syria as al-Shara tries to put all the pieces together, and everyone's worried on whether al-Shara will be assassinated, most likely by Israel. You've got the Palestinian problem is only getting worse. You've got the Hezbollah problem. No one has a solution for it. There's talks again about a civil war in Lebanon after decades of civil war. And we don't have a solution for the Iranian problem, at least for what Israel perceives as the Iranian problem. And Iran could come out stronger from this and more emboldened. And if you saw the Supreme Leader's speech today talking about getting rid of American bases and Iran offering security for the region, it's a very different vision for the region than anyone else expected or calculated for. So considering all these factors, is it fair to say that the risks of a regional war has escalated and has become worse than it has been in decades?
I'm not sure about a global regional war. We could see a resumption of Israeli or American strikes against Iran. But ultimately, most regional powers have to worry about the stability for economic reasons. We should also mention about the foreign perceptions, the changing foreign perceptions of Israel, that even in Europe, the climate is changing. Meloni was Trump's major ally in Europe, and it ended up criticizing Donald Trump after he lashed out at Pope Leo. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who was the most hardline pro-Israel European politician, is now saying this war in Iran is a travesty. America has no end game. Iranians are humiliating America. So these are pro-Israel, pro-American figures. You have to add to this that in the Middle East, Gulf countries are trying to avoid a long, protracted struggle. So this is why I'm mostly worried about Lebanon, because it might already be too late. Even if there is a deal between the United States and Iran 2 weeks down the road, and I think both parties would like to have a deal. The Iranians, because they suffered extensively, their infrastructure was completely destroyed, their economy is in shambles, damage is estimated to at least...
Their military infrastructure, you mean? When you say infrastructure, you're talking about military infrastructure. Civil infrastructure was...
And also civilian infrastructure in certain cases. This is also why some Iranians who were very hostile to the regime are becoming critical of this US-Israeli intervention, because some civilian infrastructure, health and education were also targeted.
Sure.
So the damage is estimated at over $270 billion. Trump would like to get a deal before the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, before the midterms, because of the financial markets, because of the backlash. The Iranians would also like to get a deal to ensure the survival of their regime, and I think they could also make significant concessions on the nuclear dossier. However, in Lebanon, it might already be too late. Israel has said it very clearly that even if the war in the Gulf stops, Israel would continue its fight against Hezbollah, and they are still in the mindset that they can completely eradicate Hezbollah. They said this in 2006 on the first day of the war. 33 days later, they realized it was not as easy. It was easier said than done. Most academic studies show that you cannot completely eradicate a radical group, if this group has a constituency. There was a Rand Corporation study 10 years ago saying only 7% of terror groups were completely decimated, eradicated. If they count only a few hundred members, you can completely eradicate them. However, when they have strong social support within a certain community, either for ideological reasons or because they rely on clientelistic networks, it is not possible to completely eliminate it. Hamas has been under attack for the past 2 years after the carnage they committed on October 7, and yet Hamas is still present.
Is Israel's objective to eradicate Sorry, I'll rephrase it. What is the bigger priority for Israel, to expand territory or to get rid of Hezbollah? Because one would argue Hezbollah is offering justification to annex territory. And another argument would be the annexation of territory is just a result of winning a war against Hezbollah, but it wouldn't have happened if Hezbollah wasn't attacking Israel. Which one's more true?
Well, it's a chicken and egg situation. When we did a first long interview 2 months ago, we discussed the law of unintended consequences, that in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in order to get rid of the PLO. They were successful in getting rid of the PLO, but this invasion led to the rise of Hezbollah, which was arguably a bigger, much more ominous threat to Israel than the PLO, because it was dogmatic, theocratic, it had this organic link with Tehran. So today, yes, Israel's primary objective is to get security in the north, but as the situation becomes more difficult on the ground, some Israeli radicals might want to go all the way. And in 1982, you had two Israeli scenarios, one promoted by Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister at the time, who only wanted to attack South Lebanon, and Ariel Sharon, the defense minister, who wanted to go all the way to Beirut and create some sort of Christian mini-state that would become an ally to Israel. And ultimately, it was Sharon's logic that prevailed over Begin. So when you see competing narratives in Israel, we should never underestimate the more radical elements. They are often those who indicate the direction, because Israeli society is increasingly radical. We see 82% of support for the war on Lebanon to continue. There are very few voices who are criticizing these Israeli wars. There is a consensus in Israel. They were for a time worried about the hostages, but now there is a consensus. They want this war on Iran to continue, over 65%, and on Lebanon over 82 or 85%.
So what do you think is going to happen in Iran?
Well,
yeah, it's Iran is not conceding. They want to delay the nuclear talks, as I've said earlier, and they want to control the Strait of Hormuz. Mujtaba, the supreme leader's statement today, lays out the worst case scenario that many of us feared, and that's Iran doubling down on the core aspects of the Iranian revolution. That's what's happening right now. Trump does want to walk away. Will Iran let him walk away? Does Iran want to concede as well so the war ends, like I would believe as well, and I've been saying for a while? Or are we seeing the more hardline elements of the government have a different vision for the country?
Yes, as you mentioned earlier, the cold hard truth is that the result of these 2 months of war is a much more radical Iranian regime. Khamenei's junior is more radical than his father. The IRGC is now fully in control. Iran used to be described as the mullah's regime. Now it is a military dictatorship. The IRGC are calling the shots, and because they saw that the US, or the Israeli objective at least, was regime change, they view it as existential, and they are ready to use all means at their disposal to survive. And these means are using the economic nuclear weapons that they have, the Strait of Hormuz, to blackmail the entire world's economy, using their ballistic missiles, using their proxies. They have already used Hezbollah. They are the ones who asked Hezbollah to enter this war after the assassination of Khamenei. They could still use the Houthis, even though the Houthis are weakened, and the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces. And there were also some threats that Iran could resume terror attacks and suicide bombings. In the 1980s, Iran hit a few targets in the heart of Paris because it had this long, difficult relationship with France. So I would not be surprised to see splinter groups or groups coordinating with the current radical regime, trying to export instability in order to force the US to change its policy and to come to a modus vivendi. They are not about to surrender. Trump said that they called me and they told me that their economy is in shambles. I doubt this, because the Iranians are very nationalistic. I do not think, even if their economy is indeed very weakened, they are not going to tell the United States. They are extremely averse to any sort of humiliation. There are many Iranian paradoxes. It's the first Islamist revolution, quote unquote, that produced a very secularized society. Mosques are almost empty in Iran. You have an opposition to the regime. Over 80% of Iranians are hostile to the regime, and yet, because of nationalism, they tend to rally around the flag, not around the regime, but around the flags. They do not want to see Israel and the United States installing a puppet at the head of Iran.
I want to give you a theory I've been talking about. Not many people agree with this, and I'm not saying I believe this will happen. But isn't Trump's only way out to turn this into a victory, this catastrophic war? By the way, there's a report here. Israel's withdrawing brigades from South Lebanon. Have you seen that? Breaking. Israel withdraws several combat brigades from southern Lebanon due to the FPV threat.
Yes.
And then before that, there's multiple operations by Hezbollah. Could Hezbollah kick Israel out of Lebanese territory again?
I do not think they can completely kick them out, but the front page of Haaretz yesterday was basically that Hezbollah was successfully using drones in a way that these drones were not being able to be intercepted by Israel, and this was hurting Israeli soldiers. It was making Israel vulnerable. So Israel should not think that it will be a walk in the park, even though Hezbollah has been considerably weakened. They are also now able to produce weapons locally. They do not necessarily rely on the supply routes through the Syrian regime like in the past. And the local villagers in South Lebanon, even those who are not fully aligned ideologically with Hezbollah, would be ready to take up arms and fight against this invasion, because they see that it is not only about Hezbollah. Israel does not hide its expansionist policies.
Could we see if Iran wins, if this outcome now is the outcome of the war, where Trump does walk away, Iran does control the Strait of Hormuz, some nuclear concessions, and that's it. That's a much stronger Iran. That's a massive shift to the balance of power in the region, in the world, one could argue, but in the region. Could that lead to significant rearmament of Hezbollah, whereas Hezbollah ends up becoming a deterrent against Israel, where Lebanon's new reality is the existence of Hezbollah as it has for decades, but also Israel understanding that they have to coexist with Hezbollah, which I know sounds unthinkable, but could become the new reality if it, obviously if Mujtaba wants it to be. It all depends on Mujtaba Khamenei's foreign policy.
Well, Iran will definitely need some sort of deterrence. In 2024, it became very clear that Hezbollah was not the deterrent that they hoped it would be. Hezbollah was unable to defend itself. It was unable to control to defend its own leaders. So Iran today tends to focus more on the Strait of Hormuz for deterrence, on negotiations with the United States. They still have many cards to play, but they might be overplaying their hand. I think Donald Trump would be ready to accept a face-saving exit, offer the Iranians a face-saving exit, and also avoid a new endless war in the Middle East. However, the feeling in Iran is that they have survived a deluge of fire, and they are indeed emboldened. They want to make sure that this will not happen again. So they want guarantees that they will not face a new war a few years down the road. This is why, as you alluded to, they will be tempted to resume nuclear enrichment. They have hundreds of nuclear scientists. You cannot assassinate the know-how. You can destroy a nuclear facility, but when it is buried 600 feet under, it will not be completely destroyed. And what happened in the past 2 months will strengthen the determination of this regime to get some sort of deterrent, because they see North Korea. North Korea is not being attacked. Trump is sending love letters to Kim. They became very close pals for a while because the Koreans have this nuclear weapon. Now, Iran will not be able to get it as easy as they think. The main issue today is the 440 kilograms of enriched uranium that are still not accounted for. But in the negotiations that were taking place in Oman 48 hours before this war started, the Iranians made a significant offer. They said they were ready to get a third party, meaning Russia, handle these 440 kilos of enriched uranium. It was a major concession, but Witkoff and Jared Kushner did not understand the importance of this concession, and the war started. I think it's very important for the United States to get some serious diplomats working on this file. The former CIA director, Bill Burns, wrote an article a few days ago saying Iranians have not completely won yet, but they will win if there is amateurism on the US side, if the United States does not have a coherent strategy, a clear endgame, and if amateurs are running the negotiations. We can criticize the JCPOA of 2015 for hours, but the negotiators were top-notch experts, career diplomats, and on the nuclear dossier, they obtained significant concessions. The main problem with the JCPOA is that it did not deal with the proxies, with the other issues. They refused to do the linkage.
The one that, yeah, exactly. The ones that Israel really cares about. There's Galibaf put out a post, I think while you were speaking not long ago. He put out a map of the US showing the width of the country. He said the following: if you build two walls, one from New York City to the West Coast, and another from LA to the East Coast. The total length will be 7,755 kilometers, which is still about 1,000 kilometers short of Iran's total borders. Good luck blockading a country with those borders. PS for Pete Hexeth, 1 kilometer equals 0.62 miles. So you've got the Iranians mocking the Americans. And also, if you look at the rhetoric coming out of the country, you have, let me get it. There it is. So we have the senior Iranian official, Mr. Mohsen Razai. We will not tolerate a naval blockade. If the blockade continues, Iran will respond. And this is someone that represents the IRGC, the ones that override Iraqi, one can argue. We've got Iran's Navy commander said Hormuz has been shut down from the Arabian Sea direction, warning Iran could escalate further if the enemy advances. So further blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Sorry, he's talking about an increased blockade by the... So he's essentially saying that the Iranians have an exit from the Strait of Hormuz. There is still a pathway to go through, but they will escalate if the US expands that blockade. There's a lot of reports of Iran cargo ships still getting through the blockade at just much smaller numbers. We don't know the exact numbers, but there's different reports, but it's definitely not zero. In the meanwhile, you have the Iranian economy. There's a report here by Al Jazeera saying that Iran could hold off the blockade, could survive a blockade for another 2 to 3 months. Then you've got another report on the American side that says, they've got 12 days left or whatever it is, according to US sources. Meanwhile, CENTCOM is allegedly deploying, according to Bloomberg, a new hypersonic missile called the Dark Eagle in the region. They've replaced the Ford with another aircraft carrier just a few days ago. So the military assets are still in the region. Axios has reported that Admiral Brad Cooper is briefing the president on military strikes. One includes short and powerful strikes on Iranian infrastructure. Another one includes ground operations, according to Axios. Now, again, we don't know if those are being leaked intentionally to pressure the Iranians or whether these are serious considerations on the American side. Iranian Navy is saying they've got significant military equipment they haven't used. Soon will reveal something very deeply something they deeply fear, the Americans deeply fear, right on their doorstep. That was by the Iranians. So if you put all these things together, and you see the split within the Gulf, the UAE is doubling down on their relationship with Israel, pulling out of OPEC, getting closer to the US while also visiting China. I was speaking to an advisor here in the UAE a couple of days ago who said there's a 50% chance the war resumes. Iran has made very significant threats, which is why for me a continuation of the war is unthinkable. And that's destroying the internet cables, the undersea internet cables, but also destroying the energy infrastructure in the region. It just doesn't look good at all. Trump offered an off-ramp, created his own off-ramp, offered Iran a clear path to a deal, and Iran seems to be like, hey, we know you don't want this war, so we're going to push this as far as we can. And I just feel like we're in a position now where Trump is in a corner where he just cannot walk away. That is my concern. They're just not allowing him to walk away.
You mentioned many sensitive issues. Let me start with the trolling that we have seen on the internet, the use of artificial intelligence, of memes, and this latest Ghalibaf tweet that you alluded to. It would be funny if it were not so tragic, because it confirms what the German chancellor was saying, and that I quoted a while ago, that Iran seems to be trying to humiliate the United States. But beyond the trolling, there is more than a kernel of truth in Ghalibaf's tweet, particularly when he mentions Iran's size. We tend to underestimate how large Iran is. It's the size of Western Europe, basically. France, plus Germany, plus Britain, plus Spain, plus the Nordic countries. It will become the physiography of Iran. It's a country of 93 million persons. It is a country that throughout history was only conquered by Alexander the Great. The Mongols tried, The Ottomans tried, but ultimately no one penetrated the Iranian heartland. So this is why they feel so overconfident, because they think they can endure. Their population has endured a lot during the Iran-Iraq war and in the past few years. And they think that the West will blink first for all sorts of reasons.
Well, they have, by the way, Karim, they've depleted half of the munitions, the US munitions, half of their missiles, the precision missiles, they've been depleted in 7 weeks. I think it's 7 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is. They've depleted half of their air defense systems, the high quality, the Patriots and THAAD, their best ones. They've endured already, and they've crushed the global economy.
Indeed, and it's an excellent way of showing that even if when the United States has a military annual budget of $1.5 trillion, it's enough to inflict damage, but it's not enough to bring down a regime if there are no troops on the ground. This is what the Iranians understand, and they also start to see Western signs of panic, people in France being worried about a shortage of fuel. The CEO of Total, which is France's main oil company, a few days ago saying we can only hold for 2 months. Inflation is going to increase in the United States. We live in an interdependent world economy. So they are betting that the US will blink first. But indeed, they are severely weakened. So when I see it's written here, Israel collapse imminent, this rhetoric is ridiculous. Israel remains very strong. Israel will not collapse, certainly not under Iranian threat. If Israel ends up collapsing 50 or 100 years from now, it would be because of its internal contradictions, not because of an external threat. But the Iranians tend to succumb to bombast and bravado, braggadocio. They love to make fiery statements. This rhetoric is intended to mobilize their own public opinion and to intimidate the others. They are significantly weakened. They have one single objective: ensure the survival of this regime. And I genuinely think that they would be ready to make major concessions on all files, including ballistic and the proxies, if you offer them a face-saving exit. Saving their face is fundamental. They will not...
Offer who? Sorry, offer who a face? Iranians?
The Iranian regime wants to survive. They want to stay in power.
Hold on, but that's already been offered to them. Trump has already said there's been regime change where there hasn't been regime change. Like the regime change operation is already declared over. The capping on their missile program has already been discounted. The dismantling of their axis of resistance, their proxy network, is no longer being discussed. All that's being discussed right now is the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which was already open, and concessions on the nuclear program, which they've agreed to already. So they've already beyond safe face. They could genuinely declare that they won.
This is what they are saying, but you still have US statements. We are going to annihilate their civilizations. We are going to bring them back to the Stone Age, etc. These statements hurt a lot the United States, even among opposition members in Iran. They cannot accept that their civilization that goes back 5,000 or 6,000 years is threatened to be eradicated by someone like Donald Trump. So they want to be recognized as a nation. They want to enter into negotiations not only as equals, but there was a statement by an advisor to the Supreme Guide saying we will go back to the negotiating table only when the US concede defeat. So they are also quite arrogant. When it comes to their Arab neighbors, they are very arrogant. And when it comes to the United States, for all sorts of historical reasons. So we need mediators in this file. We need honest brokers, and the United Nations is nowhere to be seen. So ultimately, if the United States has a solid team of negotiators, and if Abbas Arakji and Pezeshkian and a few others get the green light from those who really control Iran, meaning the IRGC, the negotiations could lead to an off-ramp very soon. However, it's all.
But if you have both sides wanting the other to declare total defeat, how the hell can you reach a deal then? You've got two Trumps negotiating with each other. Or two mentalities of pride and vengeance and humiliating the other side. The both characteristics are both sitting on the negotiating table. I just don't see. I'm struggling to start seeing the scenario of them reaching a deal, unless this rhetoric is bravado and behind the scenes is different, which is what I believe is the case.
Yes,
Well,
it is bravado. It is bravado indeed, but you put your finger on something very important. This rhetoric is counterproductive. When they tweet, America has lost, you are losers, you have to come to the negotiating table, this is the last thing you want to say to Donald Trump, who is obsessed with who is the winner, who is the loser. And when Trump says, you have to capitulate, I'm surprised that in 3 days of war, they have not capitulated. I want to annihilate an entire civilization. It also emboldens the radicals. So we need some adults in the room. I'm not sure we still have adults in the room in the current US administration. Pete Hegseth is out of control. Marco Rubio is a bit absent. The Financial Times wrote a sharp article criticizing Rubio's absence in this conflict. So ideally, you would need a smart negotiator who would tone down the rhetoric, and reach a deal. A deal is not an unattainable objective. However, it's all a matter of how you frame it, how you sell it to your public opinion in the United States and in Iran.
What about Russia? How big of and China? They're silent in the background. China more silent than Russia. Russia, Trump and Putin just spoke for 90 minutes. I don't think enough attention is being given to this. They spoke for an hour and a half. A day after or 2 days after Arachi met Putin. What is being discussed there? What is Putin's role in all this? What is China, the silent dragon? What is their role in all this?
Okay, so I think we have two different situations. The Russians wanted to send a strong signal to the West that they are supporting Iran. This is why they set up this meeting. They do not want to see, neither the Russians nor the Chinese want to see the entire Middle East under Israeli-American hegemony. However, the Chinese are starting to suffer economically. They are major importers of energetic resources from the Gulf. Now, they are wondering, is it worth it to suffer economically in the short and medium run, and in the long term we will benefit politically because the United States is losing credibility on the world stage, and we will become natural partners for Gulf countries and for all others. But now the Chinese are starting to worry about their economy, and an important summit to follow will be the Trump-Xi Jinping summit if it is not postponed once again. This is something that could be a game changer. So neither Russia nor China want an Israeli-American victory, complete victory. Neither do they want a long-term disruption of the world economy. Again, we live in a world of stupefying interdependence. It's high time for the Trump administration to realize that there are no winners and losers. We could all end up losing. This is what's happening as we speak.
The question, I had a question in mind I wanted to ask you. Okay, if Trump decides on the kinetic action, if he decides to strike Iran, how would Iran respond? What they've threatened to who has escalation dominance? A lot of people are saying it's Iran now. Is that really true? And what does that mean?
It depends how long it takes. Iran can still resist for a while, but their chain of command has been completely disrupted and their economy is literally in shambles. We used to say this for the past 25 years. Now it's literally the case. And let's not forget that there were massive protests less than a few months ago against the economic situation, against inflation and the devaluation of the rial. So if there was no Western attack on Iran, we might have witnessed new massive demonstrations. The Iranians want to get rid of this regime, an overwhelming majority. The regime also made concessions on the social dimensions. Women can now go out without wearing a veil. There is no longer a religious police enforcing these outdated laws. However, Iran is still cracking down on all domestic opposition members who are perceived as potential US or potential Israeli agents. So a good strategy would be to progressively suffocate them. Stop this war, make sure sanctions are targeted. They do not hurt the population at large, but only the regimes. It's only recently that the IRGC was listed among terrorist groups by European countries. Previously, the sanctions were paradoxically strengthening the Iranian oligarchs. And Obama's rationale of 2015 is that if you lift sanctions in a major country of 90 million at the time, it would create economic prosperity. And when they see this economic prosperity, they would progressively abandon their bellicose foreign policy because they want to maintain this way of life. They will start enjoying economic prosperity. So he thought that economic democratization would lead to political liberalism a few years down the road. We will never know if this would have turned out to be true because Trump decided unilaterally to tear out the JCPOA, the Iran deal, in 2018.
Masoud Pezeshkian, president of Iran, just put out a statement. The world has witnessed Iran's tolerance and conciliation. What is being done under the guise of a naval blockade is an extension of military operations against a nation paying the price for its resistance and independence. Continuation of this oppressive approach is intolerable. From the rhetoric we're seeing from Iran and the threats that I spoke to Professor Fuad today, we'll publish it tonight or tomorrow, from Iran. And he said he believes and he recommends for Iran to militarily try to break the blockade. So in other words, they initiate the war if the US does not lift their blockade. What is more likely to happen if Trump continues his economic warfare, which seems to be the most likely scenario? Will Iran just try to survive and outlast the global economy? Or if it doesn't work and Iran's economy is crumbling beforehand, could Iran be the country to initiate the war?
It would be extremely risky for them to initiate a war, to try to defeat this blockade militarily. I think they might be fanatics, but they are not suicidal. They will lose the few potential allies that they still have. So the most likely strategy is that they are going to play for time, to wait for the West to blink, to wait for the midterms, to wait for financial markets to increase the pressure on US decision makers. If they are completely, if they become paranoid, if they think that the end is near, they might be tempted to go towards some sort of suicidal strategy, resuming terror attacks in Europe or elsewhere, trying to counterattack against this blockade. But what we have to keep in mind, even though it seems outdated to talk about it, is that international law is being violated every single day by all sides. And this war that was started by the United States and Israel is a war of aggression by international law standards. We can definitely agree that the Iranian regime is a theocracy, is a dictatorship, that it had massacred its own population and its neighbors for 47 years. This does not mean that this war is legal. So if you had a functioning world justice system or a functioning United Nations, this would not have happened. And we have to of Iraq.
Everyone's talking about defanging Iran. We've defanged the United Nations instead. My last question to you, Professor, if I ask you to speculate. You've been very analytical and objective in all our discussions. That's why I always like to have you on. What seems to be the most likely scenario right now to unfold based on the facts we have today? I know this changes daily as we get more information, but based on the information we have today, what would be your prediction?
Well, I think the next 2 weeks will be quite important. If the war resumes, it might not necessarily lead to a rapid ending. It could become, initially it was supposed to take 3 days, then 3 weeks, now it's 2 months. And Trump is starting to say, remember that Vietnam took us 19 years, that Iran took us 9 to 10 years, so do not expect a rapid ending. But what I'm really worried about is that even if they strike a deal, which is possible, it might be too late for Lebanon. Again, Lebanon is the weakest link. I see a genuine risk of chaos and fragmentation. And it is very important for everyone in the Lebanese diaspora, for all friends of Lebanon, to mobilize, to support, to prevent state collapse, to maintain Lebanese national unity, to maintain its territorial integrity, to wage a massive diplomatic campaign to make sure that Israel does not occupy or annex South Lebanon, and to try to progressively recover Lebanese sovereignty by empowering the Lebanese army and the Lebanese security forces, who should be solely in charge of ensuring security, so to progressively disarm and suffocate Hezbollah. Hezbollah will not be completely eradicated. They still have lots of supporters in Lebanon, but progressively, you have to make sure that the Lebanese state is the only holder of the legitimate use of force on Lebanese territory. There is no other solution, Mario.
You seem to be more worried than ever about Lebanon.
Indeed, because
what changed?
I'm a bit like you. I was shocked by the images I'm seeing from South Lebanon. I have many friends who lost their homes. These were at the vanguard of the struggle against Hezbollah. They were definitely not members of Hezbollah, and yet they saw their villages, their homes, their families, their histories being destroyed, all their childhood memories being erased. And I also follow the Israeli press very closely. When you see the rhetoric in Hebrew, when you see what Israeli mainstream politicians are saying, I'm not even talking about the lunatic fringes, it is quite scary. They literally do not care if Lebanon succumbs to chaos, fragmentation, if Lebanon collapses. And Lebanon is extremely weak. It does not have immunity. It needs significant help only to host the refugees. And if the situation is not solved rapidly, it will sooner or later create domestic civil strife. This is what I'm most worried about. And again, there is no adult in the room in the international community. The Israelis rejected French participation in the negotiations. The Americans are not perceived as honest broker. It's clear to everyone in the Middle East that the United States is giving a blank check to Israel. So it's very difficult to ask the Lebanese to negotiate at a time when they have very few cards in their hands, no clear strategy, and no friends, no allies around the table.
Karim, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we've got Aaron David Miller, who's been part of too many peace negotiations from the Madrid Peace Conference all the way down to Camp David Summit. He knows how messy the Middle East can be. How messy are the negotiations right now, Aaron? How's it looking in your
pretty grim
in your opinion?
William Zartman, a noted political scientist, has this notion of what he calls the herding stalemate. That's when two parties in a conflict have aspirations, begin to realize they cannot achieve them, are suffering a fair amount of pain, and may be inclined to enter into a serious negotiation with one another. I don't think whether we're close to that notion of a herding stalemate, I doubt it. And it's not for nothing, frankly, that you have an administration that is exploring any number of other alternatives to find a pathway forward. The Iranian proposal to open the straits in exchange for removing the blockade and basically to kick the can down the road on the broader issues, including the nuclear issue, strikes me somewhat modified as a sensible proposal. The administration has rejected it, primarily because there is no commitment or guarantee from the Iranians that the nuclear issue will be resolved in a way that the Trump administration can claim success. But I would, if I were running the railroad, I would create a proposal which the Iranians would truly open the straits to pre-war traffic. That is to say, no constraints, no constraints on who or what is getting through, no constraints on what sea lanes need to be used, no constraints on checking in with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. Those are the three constraints the Iranians imposed when they opened the Straits. So if they were prepared to truly reopen them, I would remove the blockade. I'd set a 30 to 45 day period to buy time and space for a negotiation to try to determine whether or not some of the issues could be narrowed, the gaps could be narrowed or closed. Because right now we are on a road to nowhere. That seems to me elemental. I mean, I think it's clear that you have a pain threshold on both sides, and we could debate all day long whose pain threshold is higher or lower. But the reality,
who do you think has a better threshold?
I mean, I think there are fewer constraints on Iran. That is to say, a combination of factors. There are no midterms in Iran. There's no pressure from public opinion to speak of. There's no sense on the part of the Iranians that making the population suffer is really that much of a constraint to the folks who control the money, the guns, and the oil. The Iranians will run into production constraints, storage capacity. When that happens, though, and it's going to vary from well to well, a lot of it will depend on whether or not the Iranians found other ways to export their oil. So they have constraints, but I think their constraints are fewer, in large part because for Iran, the two primary goals are being achieved. Number one, regime, not just survival, but cohesion. And number two, they have now weaponized geography in a way that has made this an international crisis. And as a consequence, they have significant leverage. The administration's goals, on the other hand, are I think, nowhere near being accomplished. Number one, the Straits were open on February 28th. Now they're closed. Number two, there's no progress on the nuclear issue, on enrichment. There's no access to the highly enriched uranium. And the administration talked about restrictions on ballistic missiles, cutting proxies. All of that is now dropped off the list of administration demands. So I would give the edge on this in terms of pain threshold to the Iranians.
So you said this is going nowhere. Actually, no, I've got a good question for you because you've been part of these negotiations. How do we know whether the rhetoric is what's being said publicly? How different or similar is it to what's happening behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Here's a problem, Mario. Behind the scenes with the Iranians is not, this is a negotiation, a sort of idiosyncratic negotiation. My negotiation experience were Israel, Egypt, Israel, Syria, Israel, Jordan, Israel, Palestinians, where the U.S. was a broker. And there were stated public positions with enormous amount of back channel, quiet diplomacy, secret diplomacy, discreet diplomacy, because there was a degree of confidence and trust between the parties, which the U.S. could exploit. Here, not only do you have this fundamental asymmetry that exists between the U.S. and Iran, there's zero trust and confidence. There don't appear to be any back channels. As I mentioned to you during our last conversation, you can't do this on the back of a cocktail napkin. You can't do it on a cell phone, no matter how well-intentioned the mediators, facilitators, the Pakistanis, the Omanis may be. You're going to need face-to-face negotiations. And we don't have them. So to construct a pathway out of this through diplomacy, you need things that right now just don't exist. And I would say with some authority, even though when I was working, I think that the amount of stuff that the public didn't know was huge. I don't think there's a whole lot when it comes to the negotiations that you and I don't know. So what you see is what you get. I have a piece with a colleague coming out in Foreign Policy magazine either today or tomorrow, which argues that we need to change our entire frame of reference with respect to this conflict. And the conceit of the piece is, this is just another round it's one that has second and third order consequences, which are quite profound, unlike the other rounds. But this is just another round in a 47-year-old struggle between Iran and the United States. There are no definitive endings. There are no comprehensive agreements. There are no transformations. There will be more rounds, regardless of how this ends. And I think anyone dealing with the U.S.-Iranian relationship over the past 50 years would have looked at this and they would have said to you, if you ask them, well, how is this going to end? The answer almost certainly would be with no finality. And we begin the third month of the war, Mario, on Tuesday. And I mentioned to you before, Uppsala University and University of Chicago studied every conflict since 1815. The average length of an interstate conflict since 1815 is roughly 3 to 4 months. Many wars last longer than that. But we're beginning the third month of the war, and it shows no prospect, none, zero, of ending. And I think we could find ourselves a month from now, you and I, having the same conversation. Because the options that the administration is considering, number one, a short, powerful set of military strikes. That's one. Number two, keeping the blockade on for another 4 months. That's another one. Number three, opening the straits through force. And let me be very clear. If this administration decided that it wanted to open the straits, they have the capacity. It's a months-long operation. It requires naval, air, and ground assets, but they have the capacity to do it. It's just not efficient. And it will basically involve the United States in a prolonged presence on the littoral of the straits. And even then, to do it in the face of Iranian drones and ballistic missiles will mean American casualties. And there'll be no support from the Europeans or the Chinese or the Russians. So all I'm suggesting to you is the options that are out there don't create the kind of confidence that we're now we're winding this down. I don't see that. My proposal, not mine, others have suggested it, in my judgment, needs to be accepted. You open up the straits, you drop the blockade, you set a 45-day period for negotiations. If they don't work, then you can reimpose. But right now, I just don't see another alternative here.
The problem is if you open up the blockade right now, economically, they could just send out so many cargo ships and have another massive flotilla of kind of floating reserves as they did prior to the war, preparing for a blockade. And then imposing a blockade again would take months to take effect.
No, the U.S. Navy is, first of all, the Navy has set up a net. It's not even anywhere near the straits. It's sitting out there. I don't know how many destroyers. They have 2 carrier strike groups. The Gerald Ford is returning to Virginia after 300 days. They have the Abraham Lincoln. They have the George H.W. Bush. Maybe there's a third that's replacing the Ford. No, I think they can do it. It's very expensive. It's time consuming. But come on, in 40 some days, you have 13, the Pentagon says 14 Americans killed and 400 wounded. Casualties is not the constraint here. Money is not the constraint. The constraint, I think, is the fact that if you and I are having this conversation a month from now, oil is going to be over $150 a barrel. You're talking about a global recession. You're talking about inflation, not just for oil and hydrocarbons, but for food and stuff for manufacturing. We've never seen anything like this. The IAE, the International Energy Agency, said 3 weeks ago, this is the single largest disruption in the history of the oil market.
In 7 weeks.
Yes.
That is crazy. And for you to say that, Aaron, for you considering how involved you've been in the region, what you've seen over the last few decades, that's not a good thing to hear on a Monday night, a Thursday night.
No.
So how would stage 3 of the war look like? So if Trump decides to go back into kinetic warfare, not lift the blockade and then reimpose it if they don't concede, if the Iranians don't concede, because he is, according to Axios, he's being briefed by the CENTCOM commander of various options on the table, which include a limited strike or a more comprehensive strike to control the Strait of Hormuz. If he does,
I don't see that. I see a limited strike, maybe involving infrastructure, but that's not going to make the regime any more compliant, and it raises the serious possibility of additional escalation by the regime.
Yeah.
Against key Gulf states. And it is interesting what's happening in the Gulf right now, Mario. Instead of this threat, this extraordinary precedent of Iran striking every single Gulf state in some capacity, instead of creating a sense of unity and resolve on the part of key Gulf states, what it's done is frankly fracture and push each of them into. You've got the Emiratis basically saying F you to the Saudis. In Jeddah, at a Gulf conference, they decide to announce that they're pulling out of OPEC. It's not just the fact that their productions are constrained. They have cast their lot with the Americans and the Israelis. And the deployment of Iron Dome to Abu Dhabi and Dubai, that is an extraordinary fact that the Israelis did this and the UAE accepted it. And now they are basically using it to criticize their Gulf neighbors. What have you done to protect all of our interests from Iran? You've done nothing. So this is widening the split between the Emirates and the Saudis, and throwing into sort of disarray any hope that the GCC or some new alignment would rise up and collectively defend Gulf interests. It just enhances, Mario, how vulnerable the Gulf states are and how acute the Iranian threat is. They don't have to, I keep telling this to people, but they don't have to launch their ICBMs at Israel. They don't need to do that. They have weaponized their geography, and they have found the two weak points, not just in the Arab world's system, but in the international global economy's system. And they're maximizing their advantage, which is why we're still having this conversation after the world's most impressive and powerful military, combined with the region's most impressive and powerful military, the US and Israel, cannot impose their will on a economically bankrupt and fractious middle power. This
Pretty
is
big
not
one, though.
China. This is not Russia. And Vladimir Putin is looking at this and he's thinking to himself, you know, I invaded Ukraine, convinced this would be a matter of days. They would capitulate, they would surrender. I'd put a puppet government in there. And here we are, Mario, 4 years this February into a war where a country 3 times the size of Ukraine with an industrial base 4 times its size cannot impose its will on this country. And you've seen another example of it. And I would submit to you the junior varieties of this are what the Israelis tried to do with Hamas in Gaza and what the Israelis tried to do to Hezbollah in Lebanon. I mean, to me, it's just a fundamental reminder that military power alone, no matter how comprehensively or brilliantly deployed, is only a means. It's a tool.
So if going back to that kinetic operation by Trump, so if he decides to bomb Iran, even if it's a limited strike, how will this new Iran under Mujtaba respond? They've threatened to, and I've talked about this a lot today, they've threatened to destroy the undersea cables, to cut off the internet for the Gulf, and then they also threatened to destroy the energy infrastructure in the Gulf. Would they do this? Would they escalate to that level and close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, or will they go up a ladder again, depending on what the US does?
Good question. I mean, the Houthis, the other choke point has been relatively choke-free. I'm not sure I understand the Houthis' calculation here. Maybe
Apparently
they're being held
Saudis
in,
are paying them.
maybe
Apparently
they're being held in reserve. Maybe the Houthis have internal challenges. They're not interested right now in opening up the box with the Americans. But I think you can't rule out the scenario which involves of escalation that you've just identified. And then where do you go? So I'm not sure I understand. I mean, I think what's driving the administration is the need to do something, because they don't have answers. Pete Hegseth was on the Hill, and he was incredibly argumentative and accusatory, but he and General Kane could not answer the questions. Where are you going with this? And how long is it going to take? And I think we can't answer that. I think it's impossible.
They can't answer that. So how the hell are we going to answer it when they still haven't figured it out? How big of a role is, we have never talked about this. What is Israel's role in all this? You've got 2 camps. One of them is Israel dictates everything. The other one is Trump tells Israel what to do. How much influence do they have?
Well, the Israelis were responsible for sure for the timing of this war.
You said timing. That's an important point. You said timing. So the war was inevitable in a way.
I think Trump, we talked about this. I think Trump laid the basis for this conflict when in January, he basically said, help is on the way during the protests.
Yeah.
He raked the regime over the coals for killing thousands of people. Then he deployed. That was step 1. So he was out there rhetorically. Help is on the way. It's an extraordinary statement to protesters who are facing lethal force. Innocent, courageous, brave Iranians facing lethal force listens to the most powerful leader of the most powerful country in the world say, help is on the way. Well, help didn't come. So Trump moves then to phase 2. He deploys the largest single demonstration of American naval, air, and military assets since the Second Iraq War. So now he said, help is on the way. Now he's got all of this stuff out there. So Netanyahu comes to him on February 26th and says, we have information that Ali Khamenei and others will be in place certain at time certain. And Trump cannot pass this opportunity, just as he could not pass up in June of last year to be the first American president to strike Iranian nuclear sites without causing a regional war and without triggering any sort of meaningful Iranian response. We got away with that. He got away with killing Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. So Netanyahu calls him and says, so Trump says, yeah. So Netanyahu is pushing on a very, very, very open door. I think it, the notion that a clever Israeli prime minister cons an American president into going to war, I think is just wrong. I think Trump wanted to do this. I think he was looking for a rationale. And I think the Israeli briefing, the head of the Mossad by David Barnea, lays out the case for regime change. Somewhat surprised by Barnea's presentation. He's such a good analyst and very level-headed. Whether he believed what he was saying or not, he was clearly wrong. So that's step two. Step three is the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, tell him on the 26th, 27th, boss, dad, the negotiations are going nowhere. Then that completes the trifecta. So
why would they say that to him?
Because they believed it, or they didn't understand exactly what the Iranians were proposing. Look, as far as I'm concerned, there was not a chance of those negotiations succeeding.
Oh, okay, wow.
And I think that the Israelis have played a critical role in how the war begins. They will not play a critical role in how the war ends.
Agree. Well, hopefully you're right, and that's what I believe as well. Because why?
Well, because first of all, the issue now is the Straits and the nuclear issue. If Donald Trump wants to do a deal with Iran to get out of this war, he is not going to let Benjamin Netanyahu's requirements stop him.
Could he make a deal at the detriment of Israel? Like, hey, keep your axis of resistance. We'll lift some of the sanctions, the secondary ones, the ones he could do with executive order, or I think the primary or secondary ones. We'll unfreeze some of your assets, open the Strait of Hormuz, charge a fee for X number of months. We'll take 5%. Somehow the Iranians agree because he unfroze his assets. And that would be a nightmare for Israel. Could that scenario unfold?
I don't think, not as baldly as the way you described it. I think that proxies as a requirement are off the table. I think significant restrictions on Iraq's ballistic missiles are off the table. Regime change, which is a third Israeli requirement, is off the table. The one issue where Trump needs something, at least a decent story to tell the Israelis, is the enrichment issue. That's where I think he's going to be hesitant to compromise. He needs that. Forget Netanyahu. Yeah. He needs that to justify what all of this has been about.
Yeah. And the Iranians would be wise to give him that.
I'm sorry, what?
Well, the Iranians would be wise, in my opinion, to give him that for the right concessions.
I mean, they're going to demand stuff in return, but I would think yes. But again, we don't. What I really don't know, and I have great respect for the people who study Iran. I've had a couple of them on the show. I have at Carnegie. I've talked to others. There are 3 or 4 really good analysts. Suzanne Maloney at Brookings, Danny Zitrinovich, who works for the Israeli Institute of National Security Studies, Ali Vaz, who works for the International Crisis Group. And there are others. Ray Takei, who works for CFR. But nobody knows. That's the problem. Nobody knows exactly what the dynamic is. and what are Iran's negotiable positions. So I think that when I say that the Iranians have achieved two important objectives, number one is to withstand the military pressure and to demonstrate that they're still in control. That's one. And number two, again, they have demonstrated with a terrifying power that geography is destiny.
Yeah. I want to ask you about Israel. You've worked with them, negotiated with them for so many years. Just explain to me, what is their goal? What is Netanyahu's goal?
Well, first of all, Israel, I mean, we're talking about, I mean, I had experience with a half a dozen Israeli prime ministers in the negotiations. And, you know, to describe to you what Yitzhak Rabin wanted, what Shimon Peres wanted, what Ariel Sharon wanted, what Ehud Barak wanted, what Benjamin Netanyahu wanted, it's hard. You have a situation in which the Arab-Israeli if you looked at the Arab-Israeli confrontation line in 1948, and you looked at the Arab-Israeli confrontation line in 2026, even the most hard-bitten pessimist and cynic would have to concede the fact that there has been a fundamental transformation in the relationship between Israel and its neighbors. You have two imperfect but highly functional treaties of peace. One concluded between Israel and Egypt in 1979. One concluded between Jordan and Israel in October 1994. You have three other agreements. One between Israelis and Palestinians, one between Israelis and Lebanese, and one between Israelis and Syrians, which have not come to fruition. And in my judgment, it's hard for me to imagine how you consummate those three other sets of negotiations. You also have the Abraham Accords, of course, and specifically the relationship between Israel and the Emiratis, which, contrary to a lot of conventional analysis, has gotten stronger, not weaker, as a consequence of Iran's strikes.
It's obvious now. Israel had the Iron Dome in the UAE.
Right. If you ask me look, Benjamin Netanyahu was the longest governing prime minister in the history of the state of Israel. He now presides over the most extremist right-wing government in the history of the state of Israel. You have two ministers, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are outspoken racists. They believe in Jewish supremacy. They look at Palestinians as if they are not equal, to say the least. And you have an Israeli prime minister who is on trial for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. 5 years in running now in a Jerusalem district court before 3 judges. The reason Benjamin Netanyahu, reasons of ideology, but for politics, has this government is because if he does not remain prime minister, he faces 2 unpalatable outcomes. One, he's convicted. And as you know, Ehud Olmert served 17 months in an Israeli prison, former Israeli prime minister, for one of the charges that Netanyahu was accused of. Or he could cut a plea deal, which would end his political career. So he must remain in power, and he has the largest and most coherent political party, which does not have a history of devouring its own and getting rid of its leaders or fracturing. And he is the most skilled politician, ruthless politician, I think, in the history of the country. And I think on the 2 core questions, Israel just turned 78, country just over 10 million people. On the two core questions, I find this to be stunning, but it's true. The majority of those 10 million Israelis, there is no majority for what the boundaries of the state should be or what the identity of the state should be. Those two questions, Mario, are still open. And Israel has its own internal reckoning. What kind of state is it? Is it a democracy? Is it a Jewish state? A Jewish democracy? Is it a liberal democracy? Is it Hungary? What is it exactly? Because Netanyahu has opened up, aside from the occupation, which is very hard. I mean, Israel right now, I would classify Israel as a preferential democracy. It is not a democracy for all of its citizens, the 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. And clearly, it's no democracy for the 5.5 million Palestinians that it holds sway over. I see almost no chance that the Israeli-Palestinian issue will be resolved in the way we were thinking of resolving it at Camp David in July 2000. I just don't see how. Too much trauma for both sides, too much fracturing, too much violence, too much pain, too much anger. And that's a real problem. Israel, Lebanon, we've seen wonderful meetings in Washington, but we're a long way away from anything you and I would regard as an Israeli-Lebanese peace treaty. And even though the U.S. has brokered Israeli-Syrian negotiations, which fascinating story, between senior Israeli officials and Ahmed Shara, formerly head of al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda derivative in Syria, talking to the Israelis about security arrangements. I don't lose hope, Mario, because I have 2 children. Well, I have grown children, but I have 4 grandchildren. And since neither you nor I can see what's in front of us, for good or ill, we just can't see what's in front of us. I encounter people, Mario, who say to me, Aaron, you're dreaming. There'll never be anything like peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And I'm a moderate human, so I don't yell and scream at these people. But I wonder in my own mind, how can they say that? How can they know that? No one ever believed apartheid would end the way it ended. South Africa has major challenges. But Mandela and de Klerk were able to create a transition, a pathway out of this. I continue to believe that there is an answer, and it involves separation through negotiations. Maybe it's a confederation, maybe it's 2 states, I have no idea. Because right now, neither of those 2 things are on the horizon. Only violence, occupation, and Gaza, which is dysfunctional, divided, and unfortunately, not just sporadically violent, but for the roughly 2 million Palestinians who live in the 47% that Hamas controls. You have profound problems with shelter and sanitation, inadequate medical care, food insecurity, children who are not being educated. Not for 4 years. What are we, October 2023? Not for 3 years. I mean, think about the trauma of young Palestinians who've grown up, teenagers, 15-year-olds on October 7th. And by the way, that also applies to the trauma that Hamas inflicted on Israelis for those 48 hours in the wake of October 7th. The indiscriminate killing of civilians, the sexual predation, the mutilation, the taking of hostages. And then Israel's response, the prosecution of a war in which the Israelis were prepared to, I'm not an international lawyer, the Israelis were prepared to expand the numbers of civilians killed in order to accomplish their military objectives. And the IDF now, the Israeli Defense Forces, have now, I think, basically pronounced and agreed that you're talking roughly 70,000 Palestinian civilians, even if you deduct 20,000 of those from Hamas fighters. I mean, what kind of, think about that. So it's hard to overcome that trauma, Mario, on both sides. And the Palestinian National Movement is so divided and dysfunctional. Palestinians who won't get a chance to choose between Mahmoud Abbas on one hand, an aging, authoritarian, nepotistic leader, and Hamas on the other, who, in doing October 7, exposed an entire population to the ferocity of the Israeli military. Maybe willfully, I suspect. So I mentioned this to you before. I borrow a phrase from the last president, American president, who ever had a real emotional impact on me, was John F. Kennedy. He was assassinated, I was 12. But Kennedy described himself as an idealist without illusion. And that's where I am. That's where I've been for a long time. I'm not going to say never. It's morally unconscionable. I won't say never here as I watch American democracy erode and effective constitutional governance in this country and the aggrandizement of presidential power on a scale we've never experienced before. I think I made this point to you last time we talked. When the founders drafted the U.S. Constitution, they mentioned the word I. And someone asked me years ago, why is the word I mentioned in the U.S. Constitution? I couldn't figure it out. Why would they want to put a personal pronoun in there? We the people, I can see that, but why I? And you know why it's in there? Because they took the inaugural oath that the President of the United States takes, and they put the entire oath in Article 2. And it was a reminder that the document is the source of authority. Popular sovereignty, the people are the source of authority. And it's a reminder to those who hold the office that they are subordinate to those things. And this president has no conception of that. At any rate, I won't give up on America. I won't give up on Arab-Israeli peace. I will say, though, Mariano, it's only been our second conversation. It's a wonderful conversation that you conduct. It really is.
Oh, thank you.
Your listeners are very fortunate to have you.
No, it's kind of you. Kind of you to end it on that.
As the virtue of being true, Mario. As the virtue of being true.
Yeah,
so we'll do it again.
I'm always, as the audience sees me, I'm usually just silent whenever you're speaking. I think you're just really eloquent in expressing those very complex ideas. And I obviously recommend people check out your podcast as well, which I listen to.
Means a lot. Take care, man.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We've got our final guest coming in right now, Dimitri Lascaris. Whew, that was I'm sure you guys enjoyed that conversation with Aaron. I always love having him on the show. He just kind of compresses so much experience and so much history in a very short period of time and makes it relevant to what we're seeing today to allow us to make sense of it. It generally is, no one is completely unbiased and objective as a human, but he tries to be as analytical as possible. And I really enjoy these conversations. So we've got Dimitri Lascaris to come in to talk about how Iran, we're seeing all these different statements. There was another statement that was made yesterday by the deputy chair of Iran's Majlis, National Security Commission. He said, negotiations are futile. We need to humiliate America. We did not agree to the removal of a single gram of highly enriched uranium. Iran needed the ceasefire to replenish our arsenals. So this is the type of rhetoric we're seeing from Trump. We're seeing very similar rhetoric from Iran. I want to ask Dimitri, I'll read out a few more news updates for you guys, just so you're in the loop. But when I asked Dimitri, what is the sentiment like in Iran? We're talking about what Trump wants, what Trump says. But Trump is not really the person that calls the shots. He's not the only person that calls the shots. We got the Iranian parliamentary speaker who said, if you're making fun of Hegseth and Trump, saying if you build 2 walls from New York City to the West Coast and another from LA to the East Coast, the total length would still be 1,000 kilometers less than Iran's total borders. Giving an idea to the audience, said, good luck blockading a country with those borders, and then makes fun of Hegseth afterwards. That's coming out of the Speaker of the Parliament. So Dimitri is with us now in the studio now. The team just told me he'll come up in a few seconds. But I want to understand, when we're seeing that rhetoric, what is Iran's stance on all this? What is their stance on Hezbollah? Now and following a permanent peace deal or temporary peace deal, but an end to the at least conflict we're seeing now. And why did they delay the negotiations of a nuclear program? Do they find this to be the best option, and are they genuine to try to reach an end to the war, or are they intentionally pushing Trump into a corner, knowing that he will capitulate eventually, whether he will strike Iran one last time before he does, or capitulate now and pretend it's a win and give Iran a lot more concessions? What will those concessions look like? What will that look like for Israel? If Trump's only path to get Iranian concessions is do business with them, the American voter might be fine with it. Trump will be like, hey, I got Iran to give up on their nuclear program, a better deal than the JCPOA. I replaced the regime. I've got a new regime. And now we're doing business with a new Iran. That sounds great. Sounds great for the world, for the US, for Iran. Sounds terrible for Israel. So could we see a deal between the US and between Trump and Iran that would come at the detriment of Israel? That's another possibility. But the other possibility, the more pessimistic one, is one that is seeming more and more likely, and that is going back into war. As I said earlier, Admiral Brad Cooper, the current CENTCOM commander, he's briefing Trump next week, a week from now, exactly 7 days from now, on options to strike Iran. One of them is a limited strike, short and powerful. That's the quote from Axios, on their infrastructure. Another one is a ground operation to seize part of the Strait of Hormuz, or part of Hormuz. I'm guessing seize some of those islands to control the Strait of Hormuz. And another one as well, this seems like a crazy one, is a special forces mission to take Iran's enriched uranium. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be one, two, or all 3 of them. Now, that's a pretty scary scenario, considering the threats that Iran has made that I've talked about on the show. Destroying the energy infrastructure in the Gulf, destroying the Yanbu pipeline in Saudi, that is the alternative to the Strait of Hormuz, destroying or damaging the plant, the Fujairah refinery as well, and the UAE's ability to export oil outside the Strait of Hormuz. So alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz being destroyed or damaged, and the closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Because what else could Iran do? They can't strike the US mainland. They can strike US bases, but they've already caused significant damage. They are unlikely to be able to strike the Armada, the aircraft carriers. So their last card, their final card, which is probably their most powerful card, what Medvedev calls their nuclear weapon, is the Strait of Hormuz, or the energy infrastructure, the global economy. And if they strike those targets and the Qatari gas fields, as they did before, but more viciously than they have before, then what? Then the global economy is screwed. Trump is politically screwed. The region is screwed. And Iran is screwed. If Iran plays all their cards, then Trump has no reason other than depleted munitions, but he could just drop bombs from fighter jets, as we've had other experts say on the show, and destroy Iran's energy infrastructure. That is I'm the one that always says how I think the war is over. If you look at that news, and then the move of the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile, according to Bloomberg, is being moved to the Middle East. First I hear about it, I asked Col.Macgregor about it a couple of hours ago, and he said, Mario, I've never heard about it. It's a Mark 5 hypersonic missile that can that has a range of 1,725 miles that could destroy deeply buried underground facilities and bunkers. So could we see that being utilized by the US now to destroy Iran's underground capabilities, the ability to manufacture new missiles, the ability to hide their missile launchers? But if they get a Mark V hypersonic missile involved, that means it's preparation for a prolonged conflict, not a limited attack, because a limited attack doesn't need to really destroy their underground missile and missile launchers. It's more going to be focused on, if it's a limited decapitation strike, on their leadership. The only option, and again, I don't think any military option is a good idea whatsoever, and I've been saying this since before the war, but the only option that wouldn't really concern me is a strike on their military leadership, is to get rid of the IRGC commanders that are less willing to strike a deal with the US, and then scare the remaining negotiators and IRGC commanders to accept a deal with some concessions. That would be not a good idea, but the least horrible idea out of the ones we've talked about, anything kinetic. Now, obviously, there's the economic warfare, the blockade. Not sure if this will work. I'm going to give you different perspectives on this. So we've got the impact this will have on American allies in Asia, including China, not an American ally. This is a report from Politico and JP Morgan and Citigroup. Oil inventories in parts of Asia are days or weeks away from hitting operational minimums. And that's before the summer driving season kicks off. Citigroup already forecasts, based on the current status quo, oil at $110 in Q2. And if we don't see a continuation of the war, $95 in Q3. But if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, but again, we're not talking about war and strikes on the Gulf infrastructure, energy infrastructure. We hit $150 a barrel by June, by next month. So according to Citigroup, we could hit $150 a barrel by next month. Asian storage is already seeing steep declines. Global refineries are already cutting runs. A Memorial Day gas price spike could be fatal for Republican chances in the midterms. The White House insists everything is fine. Analysts say the real pain is already locked in. Quote, that's from Politico. Prices at the pump are going to go up. Shipping gets more expensive. Trucking gets more expensive. Everything at the store gets more expensive. So that's Iran's card. That's what Iran's planning for, or hoping for, planning for. Then you've got the other side of this. Let me see if I can get you the report that talks about the impact this will have on Iran's economy. So here it is. This is from New York Times. Iran has 12 to 22 days of oil storage left, and the deadline is doing the negotiating. So that's that report came in April 28th, a couple of days ago. Iran has been, so this is the most important number we need to look at, how much storage, how many days of storage they have. Iran has been pumping crude oil with nowhere to ship it since the US blockade began. Storage tanks across Kharg Island and the mainland are nearly full. Once they max out, Iran has to choose between shutting production or dumping oil at fire sale prices through whatever shadow fleet vessels can sneak past the blockade. So there are ships going through the blockade. The blockade is not perfect. Iran has found ways around it, and I've talked about this before. I'll read out a summary in a bit, going through how they're able to do it. There's multiple ways they're doing it. Some of them maybe with US permissions, others not. One of them is a kind of, sailing very close to the Pakistani border and avoiding international waters. I saw a report about that, I think yesterday. I talked about it on the show. But first, it's a very small amount. We don't know the exact amount, but it's much smaller than we saw, obviously, before the war, during the war. So if they start having to shut off their wells, Iran is, then that would be either option breaks the regime's already battered economy. This explains everything about Iran's proposal. So the proposal that Iran made to the US 2 days ago is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and so they'll reopen it. The US will lift their blockade. But when I say reopen it, while continuing to charge a fee for ships that go through the strait. It's a desperate move from a country running out of physical space to soil its only major export. Dimitri will be with us. The team just told me less than a minute he'll be up there just sorting his internet and his audio. So according to this report, Iran has 3 weeks. According to another report, the global economy is going to take a massive hit in the next couple of weeks, $150 a barrel by next month if this blockade continues. So if the clock is ticking, Will Trump concede defeat again? Or will he then have no choice but to revert to military strikes? So this is the game that we're seeing right now, seeing who blinks first. Europe is starting to criticize the US. We have Merz saying the US was humiliated. France has threatened Israel with sanctions within days if it doesn't change course with the region. Meloni publicly broke with Trump after the Pope saga. And Spain is obviously Sanchez, one of the loudest voices, and he's calling to suspend the EU-Israeli trade agreement. So we're seeing Europe, there's not much they can do. They're being very, they're very critical of Iran as well. They want to open the Strait of Hormuz. They may, I think there's a Charles de Gaulle in the region, if I'm not wrong, the French aircraft carrier. But they could be sending more warships to the region to open the Strait of Hormuz, minesweepers to the region. But that does not mean they agree with the US, with Trump in this war. They've been very critical of Trump and even more critical of Israel. And then there's the Gulf. The UAE just broke off OPEC. And that is very significant, as we saw earlier. Actually, before Dimitri joins, I think you guys might want me to repeat the speech by Supreme Leader Ali Mojtaba Khamenei. I won't read out the whole speech. Actually, I'll read out the summary of it and a couple of analysis points on it. So number one, he talks about Iran being the historic defender of the Gulf, talking about historically how they've expelled Portugal and the British from the Persian Gulf. So he's painting Iran as the leading power in the region that will provide security to the region as well. Ironic, after Iran struck all the countries here. Then he calls the Islamic Revolution the turning point that ended foreign domination of the region. So a lot of us were hoping Mojtaba Khamenei would be less, I'll use the word radical, or less ideological than his father. But others like myself said that's highly unlikely, especially knowing his background. And especially considering that we've killed, I'm telling my team to bring up Dimitri, killed his whole family. And his statement is kind of indicating that. Then he says the last 60 days proved Iran's naval forces can stand up to the world's biggest military. He said Iran's naval forces. He should have said Iran's military, but he's right. Declares America's presence, quote, the most important cause of insecurity in the Gulf. Says the US bases are too fragile to protect even from themselves, let alone protect the Gulf. Talks about a new management of the Strait of Hormuz that will bring peace and economic benefits to all the Gulf nations. Says the bright future of the Persian Gulf will be without America. Foreigners, I'm going to read out another exact quote, foreigners who maliciously covet from thousands of kilometers away have no place there except at the bottom of its waters. And then it says, calls this moment, quote, the dawn of a new regional and global order. So he's doubling down on the concept of the Iranian Revolution, the objectives of the Iranian Revolution, and he's exactly what Trump would not like to see in Iran right now. He's not conceding in any way, and he's doubling down on Iran, not only controlling the Strait of Hormuz, not only getting rid of U.S. bases, but becoming almost like the hegemon in the region. So that's the Supreme Leader's statement, which makes me worried, Dimitri, is I just don't find Trump could walk away with Iran's current stance. I'm not saying Iran's current stance is not justified. I'm just saying that my optimism was just crushed in the last few days after Trump's rhetoric and now Iran's rhetoric as well.
Well, Trump can always make concessions to Iran. He is purportedly the most powerful man in the world, and I suspect that the Iranians would be very happy to do a deal along the following lines. Iran has the right to engage in nuclear enrichment for civilian purposes, which is simply consistent with their rights under international law. So let's say up to the level of 5%, which is what you generally need to enrich to for purposes of a civilian nuclear reactor. Secondly, Iran has to have the crushing sanctions lifted, which have done immense damage to the innocent people of Iran. They've suffered far more than people in a leadership position have. Thirdly, the United States and Israel have to stop bombing Iran and have to stop bombing other countries in the region, especially those that are allied with Iran, and respect the United Nations Charter. And they have to unfreeze Iranian assets. And that's it. I'm pretty sure that if Trump were willing to agree to those 4 demands, which are eminently reasonable and consistent with international law, that this would all be over. The problem is not that Trump can't agree to these things. The problem is that Trump won't agree to these things because Trump believes that his country has a right to dominate the entire world. And if he continues to harbor that belief and to act upon it, he's going to cause a global economic crisis.
So there's air defense activity in Iran as we speak. I'm assuming that's like just happened 4 minutes ago, getting reports of it. I'm assuming this is, I'm asking for more, there's a few sources mentioning it now. I'm asking my team for more clarity. And that's as Trump is speaking. Let me see if I can get more information on this. Okay. All right. So some developments that happened while I was speaking. So Trump said, nothing, no war, just before everyone freaks out. We are in what some people would call a war. So he just said that now. And he also said Iran is dying to make a deal. I can only tell you that. Their drone factories are about 82% down. Their missile factories are almost 90% down. Same rhetoric. It shouldn't be a surprise. Now, the air defense activity, I do want to be clear that the one that happened last time, twice, 2 days in a row, is most likely one of them was the air defenses being tested. And the one afterwards was them intercepting drones. There's audio of air defenses in southern Tehran. Yeah, so going back to so I just want to give the updates on this. There's more updates coming in, so I'll mention them as they come in from the team. But you said based on international law, I agree on everything you've said, but Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz, would you agree that this needs to be temporary, considering international law and the law of the seas? And what's practical and practical for the global economy and for the Gulf and for the world?
No, I don't agree that Iran has to cede control over the Strait of Hormuz. This is a complex question. And remember that Iran is not a party to the Law of the Sea Convention. Yeah. So there, is a very narrow strait. The actual width of the strait is less, at its narrowest point, is less than the distance under the Law of the Sea Convention of the territorial waters of Oman and Iran. And there are various exceptions relating to security, which enable or entitle Iran and Oman to exercise a certain degree of control over the strait. So we can get into the legal debate. It's a complex issue. It's not nearly as simple as Western leaders want you to believe. And by the way, Mario, let's be serious here. Who are they to lecture people about freedom of navigation, for God's sakes? They were bombing civilian vessels in the Caribbean Sea, then in the Pacific. They murdered civilians. They have imposed a blockade on Cuba, which is a flagrant violation of international law. Their blockade on Iranian ports is a flagrant violation of international law. The United States and other Western navies have been intercepting Russian vessels on the high seas. Israel just today sent naval vessels out a little distance from where I'm currently situated in the south of Greece and intercepted a peaceful humanitarian mission headed towards Gaza in international waters. This was a flagrant act of piracy. They actually, as I understand it, they took some of the people who were on these boats, these humanitarians, dumped them on the island of Crete. They had no right to do that. They entered the territorial waters of Greece and dumped them on the island of Crete. And apparently they took others off to Israel. They kidnapped them. It's a flagrant act of piracy. Nobody in the West gives a damn about that. Nobody in position of power. They're going to allow Israel to get away with it again. So who are they to lecture anybody about freedom of navigation? There's nobody today who is doing more to harm freedom of navigation than the major Western powers. So let's be serious here. But at the end of the day, I want to come back to your question. In my opinion, I'm only guessing here. I don't have any, hotline into President Pezeshkian's office or to the Supreme Leader. But I think that if they actually satisfied the 4 demands that I mentioned, okay, lifting the sanctions, unfreezing Iranian assets, allowing Iran to enrich uranium for civilian purposes up to the level of, let's say, 5% or thereabouts, and ironclad guarantees that they will stop violating the sovereignty of other states in the region, I think Iran probably would do exactly what it was doing before this criminal war of aggression was launched.
They'll also, I think they'll need, I don't think Iran will budge on the lifting of sanctions and unfreezing of some of the assets or some of the sanctions as well. I think that's Iran's only opportunity to remove that vice has been crushing it for so many decades. By the way, just there's more reports of air defenses reportedly reactivated in central Tehran. Not sure what to make of this. That's the reactivated now. So there's been reports, and then 6 minutes later they've been reactivated as well. We don't have any information on whether there is an attack. Do you think that there was a report that there's the CENTCOM commander is going to brief Trump in 7 days on the military options he has? A limited strike, a decapitation strike, troops on the ground to control the Strait of Hormuz, troops on the ground to take out the enriched uranium. Could we see a sudden attack again by the US?
Well, 48 hours ago, I would have said it's inevitable. But now I'm not so sure, Mario. And the reason why I say that, I still think it's likely. I think that Israel and the United States are likely to revive the hot war. Because they've achieved none of their objectives, and anybody looking at this rationally would say they've had their asses kicked. But in any case, what has happened in the last 24 to 48 hours is that apparently the USS Gerald Ford, which is the crown jewel of the U.S. Navy, is departing the Red Sea. It was supposed to be in the northern Red Sea for repairs. Now, we heard a report along these lines about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and apparently it did some sort of temporary repairs and went back into the Red Sea. But the fact that that is being withdrawn, and it does appear that those reports are accurate, makes me wonder whether, in fact, this military buildup that we've seen over the last 2 weeks signifies a return to the war. I still think it's likely, but I wouldn't say that it's a definite at this stage.
So Trump was just asked, so he's giving a speech now while there's reports of explosions. Just don't want everyone to freak out. I don't think Iran's being attacked. There was also 7 drones from Iraq into Iraqi Kurdistan, but that happens on a regular basis. I just got a report from someone there. You talked about possibly moving out some troops from Germany. Would you consider the same thing for Spain and Italy? Trump says, yeah, probably. Why shouldn't I? Italy has not been any help of us, and Spain has been horrible, absolutely horrible. That's Italy, Meloni, who's been very close to Trump. According to Tasnim, air defense are activated to counter reconnaissance drones and small FPV drones. That's the same thing that happened before. So there were drones that were intercepted in Iran. So it's nothing significant. There's drones, reconnaissance drones on a regular basis. You just said something. You said you thought until the repairs took place, or the aircraft carriers pulling out of the region, you thought war was inevitable. Now you think it's likely. Why did you think it was inevitable before? Is that because they're not finding, there's no middle ground to be found, considering where both parties stand and what their rhetoric is?
Well, their ultimate objective is to dominate the entire region of West Asia. This has been clear for some time. The former Supreme Commander of NATO, Wesley Clark, revealed this, almost 20 years ago, when he told us that he discovered there were plans in the Pentagon to take out 7 or 8 predominantly Muslim countries, and Iran was the crown jewel in this effort to eliminate all resistance in West Asia. The United States has been saying from the end of the Second World War that this is a stupendous source of strategic power in this region. It's the greatest material prize in human history. That's what they called it. This has been a long time aspiration of the neocons in Washington and other Western states to dominate the entire region, and they're nowhere close to doing that at this stage. I personally believe that they will only give up on this insane objective when the pain being inflicted on Western economies is so severe that voters will force their hand. They'll take to the streets. They will erupt in anger. They will say, you are imposing extreme economic hardship on us for an agenda we don't really understand or support. We see polls in the United States already showing that most Americans are opposed to this war. So we're not quite at the point where I think they feel the pressure necessary to abandon this hegemonic objective. So I believe that we're going to have to see a lot more economic pain in the West before they give it up. But sooner or later, I know I probably sound like a broken record at this point, Donald Trump's going to have to pay the piper. he's going to have to make concessions one way or another, or somebody who replaces Donald Trump as president. Because the way this is going, Donald Trump is going to lose the midterms. He's going to get massacred. There's going to be an impeachment proceeding, and somebody else is going to come in to replace him. That's the way we're currently heading. And maybe that person will have the good sense to make some reasonable concessions to Iran.
If Iran accepts, if Trump accepts, he accepts Iran having control of the Strait of Hormuz, lets the rest of the world deal with the drama there. And if he accepts to unfreeze X billions of dollars, something that Iran finds reasonable, and lifts the sanctions that he can lift with an executive order, if he takes those steps, what do you think Iran would do in return? Would they are they open to completely giving up their nuclear program? Because there's other ways. I know you can enrich up to 3.67% for civil use, but there's also other means of having nuclear power, without enriching the uranium yourself. The Gulf countries have a similar deal with I think European countries. I'm not an expert there, but no other Gulf country has any enriched uranium. The only country that does is Iran in the region. Obviously, putting Israel aside. So, is there a scenario where Iran would give up the nuclear enrichment completely?
Sorry, Mario. That's a big aside. I mean, why are you putting Israel aside? Israel has nukes. Why are you putting Israel aside? You're only talking about other Gulf countries. Why should Iran be compared to other Gulf countries? Why shouldn't all countries in West Asia be held to the same standard, including Israel? Why does Israel get to have nukes and refuse to be part of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty? It's the only state in West Asia that isn't a member of that treaty.
No, we agree. I think we both agree that Israel shouldn't have nukes. They should be part of the NPT. Shouldn't even be part of the NPT. They shouldn't have nukes, period, considering their current administration as well, what they're doing in Gaza and Lebanon, their foreign policy. So they shouldn't have nukes. But obviously, like Iran, we both agree that if Trump offers these concessions, do you think Iran would give up their nuclear program completely? Because they don't need it as a deterrent anymore. They have the biggest deterrent, the control of the Strait of Hormuz. So this way, Iran keeps the control of the Strait of Hormuz to make up for the reparations, and their economy finally starts to improve with the lifting of the sanctions. And maybe they change their approach to foreign policy with their axis of resistance and the way they support these allies. But I'm trying to see if there's any scenario, what scenario Iran would accept. Because we always talk, especially when I talk to people in the US and the West, we talk about what the concessions are. What would Trump concede? What would Trump accept? Which seems like a hell of a lot right now, a lot more than before. But what do you think Iran would concede if they do get these concessions from Trump?
I don't think they're going to give up their nuclear program. I don't see why they should give up their nuclear program. I was in Iran last year and actually spoke with the spokesperson for the Iranian Atomic Energy Agency, and I was given a tour of the research reactor in Tehran. And what I learned is that not only is this important for generating electricity for civilian purposes, but it's also important for medical purposes. They use nuclear energy to produce various medical products which are essential to the well-being of the Iranian people. They also are able to produce various agricultural products which enhance the productivity of the agricultural industry using the nuclear energy. And furthermore, their supplies of oil are not inexhaustible. Sooner or later, they will run out. They'll run out of oil that can be economically extracted. And so why should they give it up? I wouldn't give it up. And so I think they're not going to give that up. There's never been the slightest indication they will give up civilian nuclear energy. But I actually believe that they might be willing to give up control of the Strait of Hormuz and return it to the pre-war condition. But that would require a lifting of all sanctions permanently. That would require an unfreezing of Iranian assets and ironclad guarantees that they will stop attacking Iran and will respect the sovereignty of Iran's allies in the region. And this is just international law. So they should have no hesitation in giving Iran those things. This problem is eminently solvable, Mario. The problem is not Iran. The problem is us. Our leaders are the problem because we don't give a damn about international law. We think we run the world and that we can, impose international law on others and violate it flagrantly when we wish with no consequences. That's the problem.
I spoke to Professor Karim from Lebanon earlier today, And we spoke about the situation in the entire region. He's a pretty analytical professor. I always enjoy talking to him. Not sure if you know him. And he was really pessimistic about Lebanon. He was caught by surprise by what Israel did in South Lebanon, as was I. And we talked about the region. He's a bit more optimistic about having a regional conflict. He thinks the US and Iran would eventually reach a deal. There might be some strikes beforehand. Similar stance to me. But and he thinks both sides are going to be pragmatic about the situation. But he says, Mario, it could be too late for Lebanon. I think Israel, what they're doing in the south and the rhetoric in Israeli media and Israeli politicians, he's not talking about the Ben Gvirs and Smotriches. He's talking about mainstream politicians, made him very concerned on two things. Number one is the annexation of Lebanese territory. And number two is Israel trying to cause civil strife in Lebanon. And I got a message from someone in Lebanon yesterday, I think last night. And it's actually the message, I was reading it for the audience earlier. But it says something along the lines of civil wars looking very likely or very possible. And that's someone that doesn't usually... he's a person that's always chill whenever there's conflicts. He's not a fearmonger. He said, bro, civil war is highly likely in Lebanon. Civil clash war. So that came in from him last night, exactly 24 hours ago, actually. You were in Lebanon just a few weeks ago. How worried are you about Lebanon? And are you worried that there could be civil war? And are you worried that Israel's trying to instigate civil war rather than try to have peace with Lebanon?
Well, they have said openly that they're trying to instigate a civil war. So I don't think there's any doubt about that. I'm speaking to people in Lebanon, and I'm hearing something very different, which is that there ain't nobody in Lebanon today who is going to go to war with Hezbollah in an attempt to disarm them. Not the phalangists, not the current government, not Sunni opponents. And by the way, there are a significant number of Sunni Muslims in Lebanon who actually support the resistance. It's not true that the only people who support the resistance are Shia. There are Christians who support the resistance. There are secular people who support the resistance. There's a significant number of people who are opposed to the resistance. But it's not strictly sectarian. And the bottom line is, if you look at the opponents of Hezbollah, the political opponents, what military capabilities do they actually have? So I wouldn't discount the possibility there will be a civil war in Lebanon, Mario. I want to be very clear about that. That's entirely possible. It happened before, it can happen again. But I think that's unlikely at this stage. I don't see anybody who's willing to take on that immense challenge of disarming Hezbollah, especially when Hezbollah is in the process of inflicting severe damage on the Israeli military. There was a report just put out a few hours ago by the Israeli media that yet again another Israeli soldier, we should really refer to them as terrorists, was killed and 13 were wounded in a drone strike. This is one of many such reports that have been coming out of South Lebanon in the last few days. Israel's soldiers there are sitting ducks, basically.
Oh, they're pulling out. They're pulling out soldiers from
damage.
South Lebanon. I'm not sure if you saw a report. First, Haaretz put out a report yesterday about the amount of damage they're facing. And there's a brigade being withdrawn out of South Lebanon. It was announced about an hour and a half ago, because of the drone warfare that Hezbollah is conducting, and that seems to be working.
Yeah, so I personally think the greatest danger to Lebanon, and it's a very serious danger, is that it doesn't have any effective air defenses. And Israel could just go hog wild and try to turn the entire south. Well, it's already trying to turn the entire south into Gaza. And it could expand that north of the Litani River or to the Bekaa Valley. And who knows, maybe Beirut as well. If these people are capable of anything. So I think that's the real danger for Lebanon, is that Israel goes hog wild, even worse than what we've seen thus far, in bombarding the country and in slaughtering civilians. I don't think they would have any hesitation if they thought they could get away with it, to turn Lebanon into Gaza. So that is a serious, serious concern.
And what is there any scenario where Iran would change their approach to their allies? They've always leveraged their allies as a deterrent. And my theory here is that if they do control the Strait of Hormuz, they don't need to control it. The fact that they can control it, they've proven that they control it. Do you think that's enough to replace? They don't need the axis of resistance, or they don't need a nuclear program to deter future attacks because they have the Strait of Hormuz. So could that lead to a fundamental shift in the way they approach foreign policy?
It might, but look, my impression from interacting with all of these people, people in the Iranian leadership, people in the Lebanese resistance leadership. I just had the opportunity to interview the foreign minister, the acting foreign minister of Yemen. I've interviewed the main spokesperson for the Yemeni Ansar Allah. I've sat down and spoken with resistance leaders in Iraq and people who are part of the resistance in Palestine. And my strong impression from all of these people is that what they do is largely motivated by religious conviction. It's not strictly religious conviction, but they genuinely believe that they have a religious duty to support their brethren in the fight against oppression and domination and exploitation. They actually truly believe that. And if people don't like their politics, okay, fine. But let's not discount, the way they actually feel and what motivates them. And I'll just give you the example. Just stop and think about all of the people who have been killed in leadership positions of resistance groups. When Hassan Nasrallah ascended to the position of Secretary General of Hezbollah, which I think was 1991, his predecessor had lasted a mere 9 months on the job and had been killed in an Israeli Apache helicopter strike with his wife and his little boy, burned alive in a vehicle they were driving in South Lebanon. When this man took the position of Secretary General of Hezbollah, just as his successor, he knew perfectly well that he was putting a target on his back. He was likely going to be killed one day. And the current leader of Hezbollah knows that. The supreme leader of Iran knew that. All the leaders of the Palestinian resistance groups know that. Why are they doing this? Why are they putting a target on their back and basically signing their own death warrants? Is it because they're greedy? Is it because they have some insane desire to kill Jews? No, this is all nonsense. They do this because they have a strong religious and moral conviction that they have a duty to do it. So I don't see Iran abandoning their brethren in the resistance. I would be astonished if they would throw Hezbollah and Ansar Allah under the bus and the Palestinian resistance. I'd be astonished. And again, that's just my strong impression from interacting with them. And I could be wrong.
That was my question to Professor Fa'ad earlier today. I haven't published that interview yet. Is what's more important, strategic foreign policy or ideology? What is more important? You've spoken to the Houthis, the Iraqi groups, to Hezbollah, I assume, as well. What's more important to them? Is Hezbollah's, do they prioritize their ideology over Lebanese interests? Do the Houthis prioritize Yemen over Iran, or ideology over Iran and Yemen? And what about the Iraqi militias as well? What do they prioritize?
These are interesting words, ideology. What is an ideology at the end of the day? I don't know whether I would ascribe to them ideological motivation. It depends, I guess, on your definition of ideology. I think that fundamentally what motivates these people in these resistance groups throughout the region is very simple. It's the same thing that motivates people all around the world. They want to be free. They want to be secure. They want to have their own land. They don't want to be oppressed. They don't want to be exploited. Is that an ideology? Well, if it is, they're ideological. That's what they want. And if we give them that, all these wars will come to an end right quick. The problem is we're not willing to give them that, Mark.
Dimitri, I had a lot more questions for you. The connection over the last 2 minutes just got really, really bad, so it's cutting out a lot. We're trying to fix it in the background. But I appreciate you coming in again. We'll probably do another one recorded if the internet remains. Where are you now? Which country are you in now? Can you disclose it?
Yes, I'm in my home in the south of Greece. Unfortunately, Mario, I'm on a mountain and I have really crappy internet up here. Oh. My apologies to you.
Not at all. Not at all.
It's the best I can do up here. Maybe next time I can go down into Alamata and get a good internet connection.
Oh, good. Oh, I assumed you were somewhere like you're in Iraq again or back in Yemen or something, knowing you. But always a pleasure to speak to you, man. I wish I could do it for longer. Thank you so much, Dimitri. Appreciate it, brother. Thank you, man. All right, everyone. So we do have a breaking news that just came in. I'll give you a quick recap of the news. The UAE has just urged its citizens to leave Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon immediately. That just came in now while I was saying goodbye to Dimitri. And Iranian air defenses are currently still shooting down unknown drones that came in. I think, no, that's finished now. The shooting of the drones seems to have ended in Iran. But there is a report that came in. But I don't know why. I think these drones, they're not just reconnaissance drones. They could be just probing Iranian air defenses. So Iranian media says the following: air defenses are engaging hostile FPV drones and a reconnaissance drone over to Iran. The sounds of air defenses are continuing in some areas of the west, central, and southeast Iran. But what's the purpose of these drones? Like, they don't need reconnaissance drones in the region. That's not how reconnaissance is done with satellites and other intelligence capabilities. So these drones could be probing the air defenses that are being repaired, which I'm not sure is just normal protocol in case war breaks out or the preparation for war. So that's a really good question. I'm going to look into it further, maybe break it down in an interview tomorrow, get an military expert tomorrow to kind of understand what this might indicate from a military perspective. I'll also get someone to break down the UAE warning, why the UAE made that warning now for citizens to pull out of Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon. There's another report here, similar report. The UAE has banned its citizens from traveling to Iran, Lebanon, and Iraq, and is urging those already there to leave immediately and return home, citing regional developments. That's the same piece of news, but just with a bit more context. Yeah, guys, so it's not looking good. I hope you enjoyed the interviews today. There's a lot of them that we did. There's one I haven't published yet with the professor from Iran, Fuad Izadi, I think his last name. So that's our third interview, and it's always good to speak to him. And today we got a bit deeper into the mindset in Iran, his personal beliefs. He usually talks about what should happen, what he believes Iran will do, but he never really gives his own opinion. And in this interview, I pressed him, and he did give me his thoughts on what he thinks should happen next. So we'll publish that probably tomorrow. Also, I did a great live with Dave Smith, who's first time we speak about the Iran war. I haven't spoken to him in a long time. It's a great discussion. Then we did Joel Rosenberg, who's in Jerusalem, obviously very supportive of the war. And we did that one. Then we had Col.Macgregor, Scott Horton, Karim Bitar, and Aaron David Miller in this stream. So if you watch the replay, you could listen to it. Tomorrow's guests are going to be, let me see who we have. Oh, wow. Okay. Tomorrow's another, no, that's not tomorrow. Let me see what tomorrow is. Tomorrow we have Patrick Alain Rigenberg. So I don't know who that is. That's a new guest. It's the first time we have him on the show. I'm going to check who that is. He's a historian and works in, I don't know much about him. Yeah, he's at Lausanne University. You guys might know him. I've never met him before. Praveen, who's former military in the Indian military, Indian Armed Forces, and he's a great geopolitical analyst. He's got a very, very strong following. His analysis is great and gives you the perspective from someone in India, which is someone that a country we don't talk enough about, but a country that does have a lot of sway in what happens around the world. Then we have a regular on the show, Major General Randy Manor. Very analytical. You guys love him. I'll talk to him about the drones and what that may indicate, the drones we saw earlier. Then we have Ray McGovern, a former MI6, and he's been on the show before. No, sorry, Ray McGovern is former CIA, and he's been on the show before. Then we have Chad Bianco and Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson's a regular. He's here on a regular basis. Chad Bianco, our final guest tomorrow, is a Republican candidate for the governor of California. I don't know if that's the right person. We'll see. I'll check the agenda for that. All right, guys. I've given you an overview today. I've done a news recap already. I've talked about the Supreme Leader's statement already. So you guys should be in the loop. And my team will be continuing to post everything on X if you want to stay in the loop on the latest developments there. But I hope you enjoyed today's marathon. We did 6 hours worth of interviews today. 5.5 hours. No, fuck. We've done 6 hours. One of them hasn't been released yet. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.